Well, howdy. It's time again. Good to see you. Today we continue with our read through of What Stalks the Deep by T. Kingfisher. Book number 3 and the final book in the Sworn Soldier series following our hero Alex Easton through their supernatural adventures. We're about halfway through. We're about halfway there. I'm going to see how long I can go for tonight. I've got a bit of a headache. But we'll see how long we can go for. We have roughly 7 chapters left, relatively short chapters. A little under 100 pages, so we'll see how long we go for. And I will go for as long as I can tonight. So, when last we left off, our hero Alex had just left the outhouse that is just a board over a hole. Heard the symphony of the southern night. Bugs and cicadas and all manner of nighttime creatures. Only to come back to their cave entrance and find a familiar red glow, but on the ceiling this time. At the end of things, after a brief encounter, whatever it was scuttled back down and evidently resembled a flesh sack. A sack of human flesh. A human-shaped flesh sack. That's the last we heard of it. So we're starting now. Chapter 8. I know how it sounds, I said wearily. Like a snail with a human body on top instead of a shell. But it was horrible. I believe you, said Ingold. I just wish you'd woken me in time to see it. I almost said no you don't, but thought better of it. Ingold would have wanted to see it. He would probably have found it fascinating. He was that sort of person. Do you think it was what was following you two earlier? Denton asked. It almost has to be, doesn't it? I thought of the way that flat thing had moved. Yes, it would probably make a wet, slapping sound like that. What are the odds of 2 horrible, inhuman things lurking in that mine? What are the odds of 1 horrible, inhuman thing lurking in that mine? Angus said dryly. We don't know that it's horrible, Ingold pointed out. It didn't do anything to us, and presumably it would have had the opportunity. It did something to Oscar, said Denton. We don't know that either, Ingold said, with more truth than tact. Unless you think it's in league with the man from the telegraph office. It was hard to imagine any human being in league with the thing I'd seen. He might well be in league with a snail or an octopus. We sat around the fire, which Kent had rekindled for members. It was so late it had become early, and I was busy second-guessing what I had seen. Maybe I hadn't gotten that good a look at it. Maybe I'd seen a person on all fours and my brain just made up the details, aided by the low light and probably some of Ingold's fire damp fumes. A few years ago, I'd have said that my brain couldn't have come up with anything quite so bizarre. But I'd lived through some things since then. Still, this seemed a little bit beyond the limits of my imagination. Big things with teeth, certainly. Any horrible thing involving mushrooms, sadly. But a flattened out human slug thing? Even for me, that was a bit much. Despite what you might think, I'm not a particularly fanciful person. And there remained the fact that I had heard the wet slapping sound and then Ingold and Denton had heard it too. No matter how hard I tried to turn it around in my head, I was pretty sure I'd seen something awful and inexplicable in the mine shaft. Something that had to be right there, only a dozen yards from the top. Something that could have been up here. Something that could have been hiding in the darkness underneath one of the dozens of ruined bits of machinery, watching us. You might walk by it a dozen times and never think anything of it because that space was much too small for a human being to fit into. The mine is unsafe for humans. Rice blood. Maybe that hadn't been the wrong choice of words after all. I opened my mouth to say something of the sort when Angus's head jerked to the side and he held up a hand. There's something out there, he said, gazing outside the mine entrance. Dangerous? Asked Ingold. Big, said Angus, which didn't quite answer the question. I reached casually for my pistol. A moment later, we heard scrambling footsteps and saw a light approaching. Human, I thought, and relaxed, though only slightly. I've known too many humans. Hello? Our visitor called. Doctor, are you there? Denton opened his mouth, but Angus beat him to it. Who's asking? Firelight shone on a tall figure wearing a familiar hat. It was Stovepipe from the camp, looking both bed-rackled and slightly frantic. Me, Elijah, he said. He scanned the circle of faces settled on Denton. Roger said you were a doctor. Will you come? There's been an attack. Lucy is hurt bad. How bad? Denton was already scrambling to his feet. Bear got her, said Elijah. Got Lee Mason first. She near tripped over them both. Tore her arm all to pieces. Needs help. Yes, of course. Let me just grab my bag. Ingold, will you come? Of course. Angus and I exchanged a single speaking look. The odds were good that Elijah was telling the truth, but if he wasn't, Ingold and Denton could be walking into a trap. And while they might be able to defend themselves, Denton was a surgeon, not a soldier. On the other hand, neither of us wanted to leave Kent alone at the campsite unguarded. I suspected that Kent could defend himself quite well with a frying pan if it came down to it, but one person is a hell of a lot more vulnerable than two. I'll come with you, I told Denton. There's a bear about. Are we taking the horses? Elijah shook his head. Too dark. Faster as the crow flies, he said, gesturing to the wooden slope behind him. But we gotta hurry. I'm ready, said Denton, and the three of us followed the man in his stovepipe hat into the night. It was indeed faster as the crow flies. We were only about 2 miles from the shanty town, but it wasn't an easy walk. Leftover rock extracted from the mine made an ankle-breaking slope coated in wet leaves from the nearby trees, and a couple times I thought Denton was going to be going to be treating one of us before we ever got there. But then the ground evened out and it turned into a scrubby woodland, overgrown with briars and thorny vines. I concentrated on following exactly in Elijah's footsteps, and before long we were coming around to the camp from the opposite direction as last time. Keep your eyes peeled, Elijah said. Bear's still out there. I put my hand on the butt of my pistol, while thinking that keep your eyes peeled was a horrifying turn of phrase. I generally quite like English, don't get me wrong. It lacks a great many pronouns, but it has so many other words to cover every shade of meaning. For Christ's blood, what an image. I imagine someone scraping my eyeballs with a knife, peeling the corneas off the way I'd peeled potatoes for Kent last night. We did not see a bear. I can't say I was disappointed. Pistols are not what you want to have in hand if a bear is charging at you. I'd prefer a rifle to a pistol and a ticket to another country to either. I hear that Guam is lovely this time of year. Elijah took us to a shack that was larger and cleaner than Roger's had been. A dog barked at us. He shushed it and opened the door. A woman lay on the bedside, her arm wrapped in a blood-soaked wad of clothing. Denton stepped in, all business, and pulled the makeshift bandage back, whereupon I found a pressing reason to be outside. I don't mind injuries on dead bodies, but the same injury on a living person can turn my stomach. I got far too much of that during the war. I sat down on the step. The dog whined at me, a brownish mutt that had mostly been hound, judging by the ears. It flattened itself and approached hopefully, and I held up my fingers. Unlike Thunder, this dog was delighted to sniff me, and then to try and convince me that it had never been petted in its life. I rubbed its ears, and it leaned against my legs and sighed. Rough night for you too, huh? I asked. Humans running around and yelling and getting hurt. The dog sighed again, more deeply. The door opened and Ingold joined me outside. I couldn't imagine that he was squeamish the same way I was. Doubtless he'd find grievous wounds so interesting. So I wasn't surprised when he said, Elijah said the dead body is behind the building. I've seen enough dead bodies for 100 lifetimes and didn't really feel the need to examine this one, but I also didn't want to let Ingold wander around and possibly be eaten by a bear. I reluctantly pushed the dog off my legs and followed him around the back of the shack, where there was indeed a suspiciously body-shaped lump underneath a blanket. I gazed off into the dark, looking for bears. A Galatian bear would be long gone after having been scared off, but might return a day or two later if it thought there was food. Were American bears similar? they try to shake hands with you before they attacked? Ingold crouched down and lifted the blanket, then let out a low whistle. Easton, come take a look at this, will you? I stifled a sigh and patted over. Ingold folded the back of the blanket, Ingold folded back the blanket and moved the lantern to get a better view. It took me a moment to make sense of what I was seeing. The body was of an older man, what was left of it anyway. The abdomen was simply gone. Flesh and organs torn away until I could see the exposed backbone. Not the worst corpse I've ever seen, but certainly not a pleasant sight. Have you ever seen an animal attack that looked like this? Ingold asked quietly, tilting the lantern until he could see into the ribcage. It was practically hollow inside, absent lungs or heart or anything else. No, I said, but I don't know anything about American bear attacks. Well, I do, said Ingold, and they don't look like this. It looks almost like... I stopped, hardly wanting to finish the thought. Looks like somebody gutted him like a deer, I finally said. Exactly. Most predators will go for the viscera, of course, but they don't clean their prey out like this. He sat back, frowning. You think a person did this? I asked, keeping my voice low so they couldn't hear me inside the house. Ingold dropped the blanket back over the dead man's face. I think that very few bears unbutton somebody's trousers so they can get a better shot at his guts. It's blood. You think, it could be the thing from the mine? I really didn't want to think of it getting up and leaving the mine. If there was a horrible thing in the earth, it should stay in the earth, not get up and wander around the countryside. Particularly not when I had to walk 2 miles through that countryside in the dark. Ingold shrugged helplessly. A thought had occurred to me, but how could we tell? We don't have enough information. And for all I know, this poor fellow was taking a piss when the whatever it was got him. He rose to his feet. We are drowning in ignorance at the moment, and the only place with possible answers seems to be deeper in the mine. I turned away from the body. I was afraid you were going to say that. Then emerged from the shed an hour later, bloody but quietly satisfied. I'll be in touch. It'll be touch and go with infection, but the wound itself won't kill her. I had to change my screen. Did she say if it was the bear she saw? Asked Ingold. With the amount of whiskey they poured down her, I doubt she'd remember seeing the president, said Denton. Anyway, there's nothing more that I can do for her now. I have to check back on her tomorrow. He rubbed his face, leaving a smear of blood that shone black in the lantern light. Come look at this, Ingold said, beckoning him over to the corpse. I had no desire to look at it again, but a thought had occurred to me. I could see Roger's shack only a few dozen yards away, a black outline on the gray-black of the hillside. I excused myself from the dog again and made my way over to it. He probably hadn't seen anything, was probably drunk right now as a matter of fact, but I could ask. Well, I could have asked if he answered the door, but he didn't. Even hammering on it didn't wake him, assuming that he was inside at all. I listened, tried to make out the snoring, but couldn't hear anything over the cacophony of America's nighttime wildlife. I thought about opening the door and stepping inside, but breaking into the house of a drunken man with a gun and a guard dog seemed like an excellent way to get shot. So I abandoned the thought and went to rejoin Ingold and Denton. It was only as I was slipping and slithering my way across the rubble back to the mine that it occurred to me that Roger's dog hadn't barked at me either. Spooky. It's spooky. That's chapter 8. We're going to take a second to reflect on that. Holy shit, that's gory. Cleaned them out. The whole ribcage gone. All the way up to the heart. I know exactly what this looks like. I've seen exactly I guess like a prop body in a horror movie. I've seen that exact thing before. So it's like, you know? I like the idea of it though. It's got my spine chilling a little bit. I have had my suspicions about the big dog. Yeah, I didn't fix my notification sound. It's fine. I make people aware that it's a VOD when I upload these things. So, little sound notification won't hurt too bad. Plus, we're stopping to discuss now anyway, so no interruption to the story. But, I've had my suspicions about that dog since the first time round, because The unblinking stare, the eyes not moving, and the fact that we've had this theory this whole time that it's something that shifts shape in some way, shape, or form is just. I'm so sure it's the dog, but is the dog the bad one and the thing in the cave a good one, or vice versa, or what? You know, are there two of these, or is it the same thing going back and forth? We have a mystery on our hands. So we're going to dive right into chapter 9 here, getting into it. But man, that's something to ponder. That's something to ponder. Chapter 9. After our adventures of the night before, I slept late. By the time I woke up, Denton was already down in the mine, clearing rubble like a man obsessed. Kent delivered this information to me, then poured the coffee with his lips pressed tightly together. Even someone as oblivious as I am could detect the signs that Kent was worried about his employer. He's working himself awful hard, I offered, tossing the words out like bait. Too hard, said Kent savagely. It isn't healthy, and he's not as young as he used to be. He stopped there, sniffed, and said in a slightly more controlled voice, "Of course, he is a doctor, and I'm sure he knows what he's about." "Oh, certainly, though I'm told that doctors often make the worst patients." Kent exhaled through his nostrils in a sound that was just this side of a snort. "Indeed," he said, and retired to the other side of the camp to wash dishes. If Kent was willing to break the code of gentlemen's gentlemen, enough to express concern, Denton must be acting more erratically than I realized. But then again, what did I know? I'd only seen him under dire circumstances, after all. I sat on a rock outside the mine entrance, soaking up the sun. The cacophony of creatures had been replaced by the ripple of wind through the trees. Each ripple sent leaves spinning down to the ground. It's cool, despite the sun. It was going to be a lot cooler underground. I picked up my headlamp, collected Angus, and strolled down into the mine. "Alex," Denton looked up at me with apparent delight. "We've just now opened the way through. You're just in time." "Excellent," I lied. Denton was the first one through the new-made gap in the rock fall. Ingold gestured at me to go next, and I scrambled through. It was a much longer crawl than I'd expected, a good dozen feet through loose rubble. My knees cursed me with every step. On the far side, Denton was practically dancing with impatience. As soon as Angus was through, he set off into the dark. The tunnel turned sharply to the left, still sloping downward, and we followed, while I listened desperately for the sounds of the glowing thing that I'd seen before. I heard nothing but our own footsteps. Perhaps it didn't come this way at all, I thought hopefully. And then we turned the corner and confronted a wall. The beam of Denton's headlamp swung from side to side as he looked for a way past. I stepped back, torn between disappointment and relief that maybe we could leave this place before encountering another cave-in. But it was not to be. Denton crowed with triumph and rushed forward to a dark hole at the base of the wall. "Down here," he said. "There's a way down." I took a step forward and my boot hit something that went clink instead of thunk. It was an empty tin can. I turned it over and saw the remains of a shredded label for stew pasted on the side. "Like Oscar described in his letter," Denton said excitedly. "This must be the place he was talking about, which means that the chamber should be at the bottom of this tunnel." Ingold leaned over the tunnel and looked down. His expression was well past dubious and picking up speed. He said. Denton was already on his hands and knees, his head vanishing inside. I joined Ingold at the edge of the hole, and my stomach did not so much clench as reach up and grab my esophagus while screaming obscenities. If someone had designed my own personal hell, the entryway would probably look like that. It was less a tunnel than a crawl space, going downward in a tight curve like a spiral staircase designed for badgers. Anyone entering would have to go on their hands and knees, with no way to turn around unless the crawl space opened up somewhere out of sight. "Denton," Ingold began. The doctor was already crawling inside. "He keeps going," he called back. Denton." Ingold's voice cracked like a whip. Denton jerked in surprise, and his helmet knocked against the ceiling. He backed out of the crawl space and sat back on his heels. "What's wrong?" "Listen to me," said Ingold. If you go down, you're going alone. We can't. I can't. That crawl space is a death trap. He reached out a hand as if to catch Denton's, then pulled it back. You hit a pocket of gas. Even if someone went with you, they couldn't pull you back out before it got to them too. Which means if something happens to you, we won't be able to rescue you. I understand, Denton said. It's fine. I know the risks. Do you? Had Ingold gone pale under the smears of soot, or was it an artifact of the light? Then, if you break a leg or somehow get trapped under rubble, you'll die down there. Of shock if you're lucky. Thirst if you're not. Are you really sure you want to do this? If Oscar came this way, then there's a way through, he said stubbornly. Denton. I reached out and gripped his shoulder. Probably it was time for tact. But that's never been a skill of mine. I settled for bald honesty. Then Oscar has to be dead by now. You don't have to do this. He shook his head. Yes, I do. He saved my life when I was 7. I broke through the ice on the lake behind the house and went under. He went under the ice after me, even though he could have died too. I owe it to him to try. Ingold's throat worked, and then he simply said, I don't want you to go. I know. Denton bowed his head, and I remembered that he and I had seen the dead get up and walk 2 years ago. I don't know if he was still thinking that Oscar might still be down there, dead but still moving. Maybe he had to know for sure. Fine, said Ingold wearily. For the moment it stretched out past all bearing. Do what you have to do. If you're not back in a few hours, we'll assume you're dead. There, said Denton, and began crawling back down into the twisting hole in the floor. I watched until the light had vanished and prayed to the God I only half believed in, that I'd see the doctor again. It was a nightmarish wait. Could have just gone back up, I suppose, but leaving felt like consigning Denton to the ranks of the dead. Ingold kept pulling out his pocket watch and staring at it, then putting it back, only to pull it out again a minute later, as if he'd already forgotten what it said. Angus disassembled his pistol and began carefully cleaning each part. The mine sighed and whispered around us. I sat against the wall, watching back the way we came for any sign of red light. Though the creature seemed to be able to turn it off at will, so perhaps I wouldn't see it coming. Maybe it would just appear, rushing out of the dark, a wave of flesh that would crash over us, and my imagination failed at that point, but I was certain it wouldn't be anything good. Hey, Angus. Hi. If you thought my body was at the bottom of a mine shaft, would you crawl down there to get it? Are you serious? Asked my dearest friend. I'd throw a bottle of liver down after you, toast your memory, and be on the next boat back to Galatia. He considered for a moment, then added, I might find a convent and ask them to pray for your soul. That's as far as I go. Oh, thank God. I closed my eyes. The idea of anyone putting themselves in danger to retrieve my body was horrifying. Maybe that was the difference between me and Denton. Surgeons see the bodies that get brought back, so maybe they don't all learn to give up on the ones that are never coming back. He was very scarred by what you faced in Arabia, Ingold said abruptly. I looked up, startled. We all were, I said finally. It was not a good thing to experience. It brought many memories back for him of the war. I nodded. Angus grunted. The war had receded for me in recent months, thanks mostly to time and a very wise young man named Bors, but I understand. The immediate aftermath of our experience with Usher's Lake had left me sleepless and afraid. I wasn't surprised that it had taken Denton the same way. And I was convinced that what's happening here is akin to what happened there, and it's driving him recklessly. Ingold stared down into the hole in the floor and added, half under his breath, I should not have let him go. You'd have a hard time stopping him, Angus said, beginning to reassemble his gun. Unless you wanted us to hold him down and sit on him. I suspected that Ingold would have been happier if we tried, but before he could say anything, we heard the scuffle of something ascending the crawl space from below. The light that emerged was the actinic white of a headlamp, not the bloody red of whatever the hell it was. Which is the only reason that I didn't turn tail and run like a rat. A minute later, Denton's head popped out of the hole, and he looked at us with a broad grin. The long crawl down, sort of spiral shape, but it opens up at the bottom. You won't believe what's down there. Crawling down the spiral shaft was worse than I had imagined. My shoulder pressed against the outer wall, and my helmet kept scraping against the ceiling. Even though Denton said it opened up below, I was having a hard time believing it. It seemed more likely that it would just keep going, narrowing farther, until I had to choose between going forward or going back. And Angus was behind me, so I couldn't go back. He'd have to back all the way out, and then I would. And what if he got stuck like a cork in a wine bottle, and then I would have no way out, and we would both be trapped, and we'd die in here, and no one would ever find our bodies. The walls began to undulate strangely. At first I thought I was getting dizzy, but no. The outer wall actually swept in and then back out every few feet. Keeping my shoulder to the wall made me feel like I was wobbling downwards. The alternative was to abandon the wall, though, and that didn't bear thinking about. I kept going. Stone had bands of color, long horizontal bands. Strata, I think Ingold had called them. We were climbing down through strata. I could see Denton's heels as he crawled down in front of me. Why was he going so slowly? He'd been down here once already, and he said that it was safe, but I was practically on top of him now, and how much air was there in the shaft, really? Was it getting stale, or was I panicking? Blessed Virgin, I prayed. I'm going to die down here, let it be my last view. Oh, shit. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I read the sentence before. Oh man, it's great. Blessed Virgin, I prayed. I'm going to die down here. Let my last view not be Denton's ass. I closed my eyes. That meant I couldn't see how narrow the space was. I had to keep my shoulder against the left wall. I didn't touch the right one. I wouldn't have to know how close it was. I kept crawling around and around, boring into the earth. Not claustrophobic. Yeah, exactly. Oh man. I kept crawling around and around, boring into the earth. Who had made a tunnel like this? Couldn't be natural. The floor felt smooth, almost polished. Christ's blood, why couldn't they have just made a hole straight down and run a ladder instead? It occurred to me that if you were a low, fleshy, horizontal thing that glowed redly in the dark, maybe this was just the sort of tunnel you'd make. It had fled from us before, and this winding hole seemed like the only place it could have disappeared into. Maybe it was waiting at the bottom, or maybe it was even now creeping in after us, and soon we'd hear the wet echoes of its passage trapping us in from behind. My foot banged on the right-hand wall, and it was so close. Closer than I thought. I couldn't get enough air. Did I stop moving? No, Angus would have thumped me. I must still be moving. I could hear the harsh echoes of my breathing in a space that I didn't dare look at again. When the wall fell away from my left shoulder, I almost didn't notice. I kept crawling forward, eyes squeezed shut, even though the ground was no longer sloping. Even though the echoes were suddenly different, part of me knew that I was in a much larger space. But the rest of me was still crawling downwards, and would be forever. World without end, amen. Denton said, Easton. My eyes snapped open. I was out. I was through. The walls were far away. I'd nearly run into Denton, who was standing. I stood up too, feeling my hips and back scream at me, but barely noticed. Our hellish descent was almost forgotten. We stood inside a chamber made of pearl and glory. The floor of the chamber was slick and shiny, a highly polished sheet of something. It shimmered with iridescent rainbows like a vast sheet of pearl. Either the floor was translucent and there was light somewhere under it, or it glowed very faintly in the dark. Have you ever seen an abalone shell? They're not terribly common in Europe, I don't think. I've seen them used as jewelry. The surface reminded me of those shells, only softer. More pinks and purples than blues and greens. The walls were white limestone hung with stellae. The ones that hang down, okay? The pale glow of the floor reflected off the bottom a few inches of the white wall, giving the farthest reaches of the cave a hazy look. Good Lord, said Denton softly. Beautiful, said Ingold, lifting his lantern. I put my hand to the floor, half expecting it to feel warm, but it felt like cold glass. Perhaps there was some kind of clear glaze over the surface. Even in the lamplight, I could see my hand reflecting faintly in the glaze. The pearlescent surface edged the shadow with rainbow reflections. Good God, I read that terribly. The pearlescent surface edged the shadow with rainbow reflections. Can you imagine what people would pay for this stuff? Said Denton. To use in place of marble. Spoken like a true industrialist, said Ingold dryly. Someone's tried, Angus said, pointing. Off to one side, a rusted hand drill lay discarded on the floor. I ambled over, knelt down, and ran my hand over the floor. I couldn't see anything, but my fingertips picked up the tiniest scuff mark on the surface. I wondered how long it had taken to drill that much. I sat back, watching the others survey the chamber. Ingold was peering closely at the floor. Denton was walking back and forth, as if trying to take in all that he was seeing. Angus completed a circuit of the perimeter and returned. No other way in, unless you're a bat, he said. No one in particular. I nodded anyway. I could see a few dark cracks in the stone roof. That must be the cause of the mind breathing, I thought, and then felt rather smug that I'd internalized that much of Ingold's lecture on caverns. The glassy surface, though beautiful, was punishingly hard on my knees. I met my own reflection's gaze and snorted. I looked like hell. I turned my head to speak with Angus, and my reflection turned the other direction. What I was seeing in my peripheral vision was so impossible that for a moment I didn't recognize what had happened. My eyes reported that something was wrong, and I jerked my head back, expecting to see something terrible and concrete. The reflection of a monster bearing down on me, perhaps, or a crack in the floor that threatened to tumble me down into the depths of the mine. Only my own face looked back, early with rainbows. But when I turned my head to the right, it shifted left. A reversed image, but not a mirrored one. Dread slid cool fingers up my spine. I turned my head again, very slowly, and the reflection mimicked me in reverse. Its expression was a perfect match for my own, assuming that I was currently slack-jawed, which I'm pretty sure I was. I slid my hand upward along the surface, and my reflection's hand moved with it. I jerked it free suddenly, and for an instant I looked down on my reflection's palm pressed up against the glass before it caught up. Angus? I said. It sounded remarkably calm. Angus, please come and tell me that you see what I see. Angus stomped over and looked over my shoulder. What? I don't see... He trailed off. I moved back and forth and the reflection moved with me, as if I had an identical twin beneath the surface of the floor. Angus went down on his knees next to me, and I saw his face join mine. When we looked at each other, our reflections gazed off into the corners of the room. When we looked over our shoulders, our reflections locked eyes with each other. What is it? He said softly. Damned if I know. I sat back on my heels. Our reflections didn't vanish. They stayed where they had been, gazing up at us. As I watched, my face opened its mouth, revealing rows of pearl teeth and a silent scream of horror. And that's chapter 9. Oh my god. Holy shit. Holy shit. When I read that out loud, dude, when I read that out loud, holy shit. Holy shit. I read that out loud and I was like, wait. Wait, huh? What the fuck? Oh my fucking god. Holy shit. The chills up my, dude, the chills up my spine. As soon as I read it, I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. Makes me not want to read this next fucking part. Pearlescent teeth and its open mouth screen when your reflection remained on the ground. Is it parallel? Is it a parallel universe? What the fuck? Oh, fuck. Okay, let me get some water now. We'll continue. Sorry, this got me excited. Chapter 10. I snapped my mouth shut as soon as I realized what was happening. But in my reflection, yes, I was horrified. I could admit that. I just didn't want anyone else to see it. The sweat that had sprung up in that terrible downward crawl was freezing on my body, and it wasn't just the cold of the room. Ingold, I said very carefully, Denton, there's something going on here that you should see. They must have heard something in my voice because they came over at once. Look at the reflections, I said, turning my head. Ingold let out a low whistle. Denton actually jumped, like a cat catching sight of a snake, his feet skidding on the slick floor. What the hell? Ingold brought the lantern as close to the surface as he could. The fire gleamed strangely between our mirrored faces, and then suddenly color spasmed across the pearlescent floor. Great gouts of red and white and orange, as if in imitation of the flame. I stood up. I wasn't sure if an extra foot or two of height would help at all, but I didn't like the way the color spread. They bloomed out in circles, like ink soaking through paper. Our faces were filled with rings of bruising light. Abruptly, Ingold laughed. Well, metaphors, he said, as color splattered across the floor. He sounded utterly delighted. I wished I had a tenth of his enthusiasm. Metaphors? Darwin described them in cuttlefish. These creatures, whatever they are, must possess something similar. Creatures, I said. The floor is alive? Den said. You're saying the floor is made of cuttlefish? Said Angus. No. Ingold laughed again, still staring at the fireworks display across the floor. Many animals can change color. Chameleons, frogs, fish. It's hard to limit it to one order of life. That may explain the mimicry as well. Most color-changing creatures do so to hide from predators, so possibly... He trailed off. I fixated on the one bit that I understood. You're saying that this isn't stone? I asked, trying to back away from the floor, which went about as well as you'd expect. No, said Ingold. Shell, probably. Some kind of protective surface over the creatures. Or creature. I suppose it could be only one. The color shifted, turning darker. Browns and purples replacing the brighter colors. It was still beautiful, but the sense of something other filled the room to choking, thick as fire damp. It felt wrong. Hard to explain. How can a color be wrong? But if I were pouring out ink or paint to make patterns, I would have chosen them differently and arranged them differently. These colors bled together in a way that I couldn't predict and wouldn't have expected. They felt alien. If I stared at them too long, I started to feel dizzy, as if I was looking down from an unexpectedly high place. If it's a shell, said Angus, ever the practical one, are you saying that this thing is some kind of shellfish? A giant oyster? Maybe? Ingold looked up, his eyes shining. Apparently the alienness affected him less than the rest of us. But Denton, do you know what this means? Judging by Denton's expression, nothing good. His previous wonder had been wiped away by the sight of moving faces below. I could hardly blame him, so would mine. It means Oscar wasn't hallucinating, Ingold beamed. As if this was a joy and a delight, instead of a confirmation of all of Denton's worst fears. Good to know, said Angus. I was already backing toward the entryway. I hated that crawl space like I had hated a few other things on this earth, but standing on whatever this was made me queasy with dread. What if the hard surface was only there because the faces wanted it there? What if they could open the floor like a mouth and swallow us all whole? I think I forgot something at camp, I said, and bolted for the tunnel. I was bathed in sweat by the time I got to the top of the rippling crawl. I was slightly less awful on the way up, but only because I knew that I didn't want to get any tighter. Didn't squeeze. I rolled out of the opening to one side, knocked my headlamp against the wall, and sent it askew. I had to take it off to adjust it, which is why I was able to see the red light at the end of the corridor a moment later. It's blood, I muttered. My first thought was that it was just one damn thing after the other. My second, much more important thought was that I was alone up there with it. I shoved my head down into the crawl space and yelled, "The light's here!" as loud as I could. I expected it to echo, but it didn't. probably because Angus was just coming out of the hole. Where now? I pointed. Of course it had gone out by now. Angus pulled himself out, followed by Denton and a grumbling Ingold. I don't know why we couldn't stay, he was saying. Obviously there was something between us and the creatures. Red light, I said, which stopped him immediately. Denton took off down the tunnel. I went after him, nearly losing him at the squeeze, but we caught up again at the split of the tunnel. He was looking both ways, clearly frustrated. 2 and 2, Angus said, jerking his head toward me. You take Denton left, Ingold and I'll go right. Denton bolted the moment he heard the word left. I ran after him, the beam of light bouncing crazy on his back. I couldn't remember what this branch was like. A dead end, I was pretty sure. But I wasn't sure how many twists it took to get there. Denton, wait. It is somewhat embarrassing to be outpaced by a man half your age. I told myself I was recovering from the crawl. I managed to catch up to him and grab for his shoulder. The pain in my side felt like a bayonet. Denton, wait for... He shook me off. There's a man down here. I nearly caught him. And then he was off again. And I had to stop and put my hands on my knees and breathe until the spots in my vision went away. Not 10 seconds later, I heard a cry from the tunnel ahead. It was anguish and surprise all at once, and I would have thought that Denton had fallen into a hole and broken everything, except that what I heard was a single word in Denton's voice. Oscar? I skidded around the last turn in the corridor, gasping like a broken-winded horse. My light illuminated a Ooh, that's a new word. Tableau. Like the one of the posters plastered all over Paris, advertising lurid plays. Denton against the far wall, caught in the beam, one hand outstretched. A second man on his knees at the base of the wall, head thrown back. He wore an unlit headlamp and a thick set of mining goggles, giving him the look of some strange insect dug up from the far reaches of the earth. Denton grabbed at his shoulders, hauling him upright. Oscar, it's me, Denton. The man's mouth opened and he took a step forward, lips silently forming Denton's name. That was all it took for the doctor to fling his arms around his cousin and begin pounding his back. Oscar, I thought you were dead. When they finally separated, Denton was frowning. What's wrong? Oscar smiled sheepishly and touched his throat, then shook his head. He reached into his pack and pulled out a green slate and piece of chalk and wrote, Sorry, can't talk. Can't talk? He erased the slate with a sleeve. Fine gas, hurt throat. Doctor said not to. Good Lord, said Denton. You'll have to tell me all about it. Ah, sorry. Here, let me introduce my friend. This is Lieutenant Easton. Why'd you run? I managed to get out without sounding too wheezy. Thought you were other men. Just us, Denton said. He laughed, brief and hysterical. Have you been avoiding us all this time? Oscar tapped the slate over the words, other men, and shrugged with another sheepish smile. What other men? I asked. Sorry, just had to readjust myself. What other men? I asked. Don't know. Chased until I got lost. Approaching footsteps heralded the arrival of Angus and Ingold. We heard the yell, Ingold said. He didn't sound winded. He looked uncertainly from Oscar to Denton, then back again. I'm fine, said Denton. He laughed again, another half-hysterical bark. Better than fine. This is Dr. John Ingold and Angus, everyone my cousin Oscar, who has given us quite a scare. Oscar ducked his head, clearly embarrassed, and stood clutching the slate. We've been hunting all over for you, said Denton, after an awkward moment of silence. Then you've been here in the mine? The whole time? Why didn't you answer any of my letters? Oscar shook his head. Lost, he wrote on the slate. I was facing Oscar and Denton, my head turned a little to one side so as to not blind them with my headlamp. That was probably why I saw Angus calmly reach down, lift his pistol, and point it at Denton's cousin. The sound of the gun being cocked was extraordinarily loud in the tunnel. Angus, what are you... Denton started. Take off your goggles, ordered Angus. The man gazed at us in silence, his mouth a little open, as if he'd been panting. Denton began to protest, but Angus slowly lifted the gun half an inch. Do it, he ordered. Slowly, grudgingly, Denton's cousin lowered his head, covering his face with his hands, and pulled the goggles down. When he lifted his head again, his eyes were tightly closed. "It's the light," said Denton angrily. He spent a long time in the cave, his eyes desensitized. The lights hurt him. "Open your eyes," grated Angus. "Easton." Denton appealed to me, caught somewhere between exasperation and panic. "Easton, do something!" "Angus is the wisest man I know," I said, which was true, even if I had no idea what he was getting at. "But..." Denton's face held the peculiar expression of a man who knew that something was too good to be true, but maybe if he argued, he could keep it for just a little longer. "We can't..." "Open your eyes." Oscar held very still for a moment, and then his eyelids lifted. If I had not been watching so closely, I would not have thought he had opened them at all. The eyes beneath were neither white nor iris. They were the same color as his skin, the exact same shade of tan. For an instant, I was reminded of Grecian statues of white marble faces with blank white marble eyes. Ingold swore in a language I didn't know. Color bloomed suddenly across Oscar's face. White first, a splash across each eye socket, bleeding into the lower lids and cheeks. Then a smaller blob of darkness in each eye, the size of a thumbprint, darkening half the eye and side of the nose. White blobs with dark centers. A child's drawing of eyes splashed across the face of holy shit. A child's drawing of eyes splashed across the face in a last desperate attempt to look human. My breath hissed through my teeth. "For metaphors," said Ingold quietly. "I can't make them quite small enough." The thing that was Oscar nodded at Ingold. "Shape easy," the creature wrote on the slate. "Color hard." "What are you?" hissed Denton. The creature wiped the slate clean with his sleeve and wrote, "We mean no harm." "Do I shoot him?" asked Angus. Not Oscar stood completely still, holding the slate with his message. He must have understood what Angus said, but he made no effort to plead for his life. I wondered if bullets could actually hurt him, and then immediately regretted wondering. "Where's the real Oscar? Where's my cousin? What have you done with him?" Ingold grabbed in before anyone could find out how his abortive lunge would end. The creature began shaking his head and hastily wrote, "We did nothing." He displayed the slate to Denton, still shaking his head, and then wiped it clean, and added, "He ran away." "Can't blame him," muttered Angus. "Ran away where?" asked Ingold, not letting go of his grip on Denton. "Into tunnels. We could not find him." "Why are you looking for him?" Denton asked, his voice high and sharp. The creature's expression did not change, but it hesitated before writing, as if confused by the question. "Tunnels are dangerous. You expect me to believe that he ran off and you chased him out of the goodness of your heart?" Not Oscar began shaking his head. "We mean no harm, only talk." I figured that it was my turn to speak up. "So why pretend to be Oscar?" Those strange, wrong-colored eyes turned toward me. Dark blobs and pale rings were slowly fading, as if it took effort to maintain. "You would listen to Oscar." "Well, he had me there." Not Oscar held up his free hand and, with exaggerated care, reached into his coat. Angus tensed, but the creature only extracted a carefully folded sheet of paper. "We wrote a letter." He held it out to Denton. The doctor stared at it. Ingold slid past him and reached out and took it, careful to avoid touching the creature's fingers. He unfolded it, then shook his head. "Too hard to read in this light," he said. "I got one more question for you, whatever you are," said Angus. The creature turned his head and waited, blade at the ready. "What exactly do you eat?" Trust Angus to cut right into the heart of the matter. It was going to be blood. I was almost sure it was going to be blood. Chalk squeaked. "We do not have that word." "Try," said Angus, in a voice that did not leave a lot of room for linguistic discussion. I think we all held our breath as Not Oscar wrote, but I did not expect the answer. "Many very small animals in water." That was somehow more bizarre than blood. I had a vague image of the creature crouched over a barrel of sardines. For no good reason, I felt offended. Blood-drinking monsters were something I could understand. I didn't like it, but I had context for it. An underground monster that ate small fish and didn't make any sense and piled confusion on top of horror. Angus lowered his gun. Like fish? Yeah, sounding as confused as I did. If they're very small? Not Oscar started to write something, stopped, then held up. What word is smaller than fish? Christ's blood. I rubbed my forehead. This was the second time that something inhuman and terrible had wanted to have a language lesson, and I can't say that I had particularly good memories of the first time. Ingold let out a sudden laugh, which echoed shockingly in the tunnel. Krill, he said. I bet you it means krill, or something like that. You took the cans of broth, didn't you? Not Oscar nodded vigorously. Ingold turned to the rest of us. It's a filter feeder, then it probably can't eat us. We're too big. That's a comfort, said Angus dryly. He gestured upward with his gun barrel. Now, what say you that we and our, friend here go back up top? Not yet. Then took a deep breath. You, whatever you are, you can look like other people? Yes. Then stop looking like Oscar. His voice cracked on his cousin's name. I stepped forward, almost involuntarily, and put my hand on his shoulder. He turned away from Not Oscar, and I thumped his back hard. Not Oscar put his slate away and pressed on his face with gloved hands, pushing it around like clay. Angus made a small noise of disgust. Ingold watched, his mouth open in fascination, as Not Oscar pushed his chin up and his cheekbones in and then took his hands away. His nose lengthened like candle wax running, and he reached up, cupped both ears, and pressed them back against his head. And that was all. He was a different person. Still not Oscar. Incredible, breathed Ingold, his face alight. Denton looked up at me, and I nodded. He stepped away and pulled his goggles down over his eyes so that we could all pretend he wasn't crying. Right, said Angus gruffly. Now let's get some air and figure out what the hell is going on. And that's chapter 10. Holy shit. Holy shit. Whoa, holy shit. Yeah, it's not scary or creepy, it's odd. It's a fascinating turn. I didn't expect that. I don't know how to feel about it right now. I was kind of looking forward to a big scary payoff, but filter feeding shapeshifters? I don't know. How do we feel about that? There's got to be something, because something's like clearing out the innards, you know what I mean? I think it's the dog. My gut tells me. My gut has a very firm belief that it's that big old staring dog, because it didn't bark this last time, and it was staring with like human-like intelligence the last time we encountered it. And it's still out and about. Still up there in the trailer. We'll see. I'm gonna readjust my position here. I found a way to sit that's just super fucking comfortable. I'm trying to maintain that. But yeah, it's probably the bear, huh? The dog's probably the bear. The bear everyone keeps mentioning. Yep, that's my immediate thought. It's gonna be either the dog or this bear that everybody's talking about. But I guess we're gonna see. You anticipate? What if I just ended stream right here? Imagine I just ended stream right now. Anyway. I appreciate that you're only missing in between chapters, yeah. That does help me out a lot for the VOD. You're a bitch, whatever. No, I wouldn't do that to you. I found a comfortable position to read in. The lights hit me just right. I got a little bit more energy after my headache's gone away, so we can go on for a little while longer. We have, I believe, 5 chapters left, 11 through 15. So, be a bit of a long VOD, but you know, we'll get through her. Hopefully tonight. Let me let the video restart real quick. For anybody following along with the actual book, we are on page 117 of 176. 174. Chapter 11. We made our way back to the mine entrance with not Oscar walking obediently ahead of us. At the top, he went straight for the foreman's desk and took out a sheet of paper, then looked at Ingold, possibly for permission. Ingold nodded. Not Oscar took a pen in each hand and began to write. It was immediately obvious why the handwriting in the letters was so peculiar. One hand wrote from right to left, the other hand wrote from left to right, writing 2 lines simultaneously. When he finished a line, he simply dropped down and went back the other way, wrists crossing and uncrossing as he worked. It looked like some kind of parlor trick, or the sort of act that you'd pay a coin to see at the fair. Engel watched it all with the beatific expression of a small boy who had just been given a puppy. The most amazing thing, to me, was that apparently not Oscar could judge exactly how many words fit on a line, which I'd never been much good at myself. A lot of my letters home used to have words crammed up against the edge of the page, to the point where my mother asked that if I was going to write some kind of code. Denton stood watching Not Oscar write, the first letter that Not Oscar had given him, seemingly forgotten in his hand. I tapped his shoulder and gestured to the original letter. Denton started and then began to read. I looked over his shoulder, which was rude of me, but given the circumstances, I felt that was justified. The first line read, "Please do not be afraid." I stifled an incredulous laugh. Not Oscar in his miner's coat and goggles made an unlikely Old Testament angel. And yet, shame he didn't appear as a thing made of wings and eyes. Might have gotten off on the right foot if he had. I glanced over at Denton. There was still hostility lingering in the set of his mouth, but was being replaced by something else as he scanned the letter. He shook his head at the end, either in bafflement or disbelief, and handed it to me. "Please do not be afraid. We have no hostile intentions towards you. We wish only to be left alone. You have stumbled across the place where we have slept for many years. We wish only to continue to sleep there. We do harm to no one and have no ill intent toward you or your people as a whole. We are sorry for any alarm that we have caused. We are willing to speak with you as an individual of your people, but we are afraid of what would happen if our presence became widely known. The use of mine explosives has already caused a fragmentation. We do not wish to be fragmented further. We wish to be whole again. Our knowledge of the present world is limited, however. If we must move or be fragmented, then we will move. But we would like to speak with you about the world now. Perhaps you can tell us what is happening outside the mine, and whether we must prepare for a move. We are fragmented now, but please, with assistance, we may be whole. Please speak with us." "This doesn't seem like a terribly threatening letter," I said. "At least the bits I understood." Denton's lips thinned. Assuming he's telling the truth, this doesn't prove that he didn't kill Oscar. And why look like him? If he was trying to protect others like him, I can understand trying to convince us to go away, I said. Since you were looking for Oscar, maybe he thought it would be easier to pretend to be Oscar. Denton met my eyes. "We've been down this road before, haven't we, Easton? Thing that can look like anyone, even the dead." I swallowed around a suddenly dry throat. In the Usher house, my friend Madeline had been taken over by a being that puppeted her like a marionette long after she was dead. She had referred to it as a child and begged me to protect it. And it had been childlike in its way, as innocent as any newborn serpent and far more dangerous. Could have made puppets out of the entire human race. "I don't think it's quite the same," I said. "We'd best hope not," said Denton. "This is incredible," Gold said, waving a sheet of paper in our direction. I couldn't tell if he'd heard our conversation or not. "It's world-changing," he laughed, sound of pure wonder and delight that rang through the cavernous mine entrance. I wondered if such a sound had ever been heard in Hollow Elk before. Denton looked at Ingold, and a trace of fond resignation broke through the hostility. "Well," he said, not quite under his breath, "at least someone's happy." Not Oscar wrote and Ingold fired questions, most of which I didn't understand. I sat down and put my back against a crate, feeling the strain from crawling and running and horrible revelation. I wanted a nap, and if you think you can't sleep immediately after something dreadful and life-changing has happened, you probably haven't been a soldier. Angus sat down, his gun in his lap. Denton paced back and forth, aggravated, clearly upset but unwilling to leave. Kent made coffee. All of us, I suspect, were watching Nod Oscar out of the corner of our eyes. What I pieced together mostly came from listening to Ingold while trying not to doze off. The creatures were ocean dwellers originally, living on the surface of the water where it met the air, in a thick gelatinous sheet. Some kind of relative of a siphonophore, I think, said Ingold, but much wider. He looked disappointed when none of the rest of us had any idea what that was. There it drifted for millennia, changing colors to appear like the sky from below the sea and the sea from above. And so it was able to feed on tiny creatures that rose to the surface. The creatures were all one creature, but sometimes they broke apart, then came together again. Becoming whole was how not Oscar wrote it. What one part of a wholeness knew, all of it knew. But if a part broke off and it did not come back because, for example, a whale ate it, it did not make the rest less whole. And there was more than one wholeness. Like your people, not Oscar wrote as Ingold tried to get him to clarify. Each a wholeness. Are you a wholeness? I asked, curiosity pricking through my exhaustion. No. He gestured down into the mine. Wholeness is down there. Probably they had all started as one, but had literally drifted apart on the tides. Wholeness had learned over the vast oceans of time how to use the plasticity of their cells to change into different shapes. And when they met up with another one, the two exchanged pieces and learned all the knowledge held in the other. I wondered if they ever fought or tried to eat one another. Was that possible? Would they even notice? Ingold dove in with more questions. Where were those other wholenesses? And how had not Oscar's wholeness gotten into a coal mine in West Virginia? More pages of writing followed. It happened a long time ago. The oceans became colder and ice crept from the north. Creatures lived on the surface of the water, and they preferred warmer temperatures. They could alter themselves a little, adapting to cold and to changes in the saltiness of the sea, and had done so in the past, but actual freezing was fatal to them. Other wholenesses drifted southward, toward the equator, but this particular wholeness thought that things would become colder yet. It feared that the ice sheets would follow them, so it hatched a different plan. Parts of it had broken off before and explored rivers and undersea caves, and then returned to become whole, bringing the knowledge with them. It knew that in caves underground, the temperature stayed the same, and did not freeze. If it could move itself to one of these caves, it could survive the ice. He's talking about the Ice Age, said Ingold excitedly. I'm sorry, this guy's just a pure little guy. He actually saw it. You mean the one with mammoths and whatnot? Angus asked, in a tone that indicated that he did not approve of mammoths running about loose, regardless of the temperature. Exactly. Although it's been proposed that there have been many geological cycles, so it might not have been the most recent ice age. These mountains are very, very old. Ingold laughed again. My God, things that wholeness must have seen. Actually, the wholeness hadn't seen very much, as it turned out. It was sensitive to light, and dark could make crude lenses, but that was all. Not Oscar had spent years on its own refining its ability to see, and would still be considered nearsighted by human standards. The wholeness might have perceived the blob of a mammoth go by in the distance, but what it saw was mostly tiny wiggly things in the water. It had kept to rivers as it oozed its way onto land, leaving the other wholenesses behind. Ingold peppered Not Oscar with a great many questions about salinity and salt regulation, but it became clear that Not Oscar lacked the vocabulary to explain, even assuming that there were words for what it had done. I can't say I followed any of it, and I was glad when he gave up. At last the wholeness had entered a cave system, deep enough that it thought it would survive the ice. And there it had gone to sleep, entering a hibernation period where it needed very little food. But it had a sentry that stayed awake, which would watch over it and fetch food as needed, and which would merge back into the wholeness after a time, bringing knowledge of the world outside the cave, then splitting off again. The century would tell the wholeness when it was safe to return to the sea. And so it had been for a long, long time. Not Oscar did not know how long. Thousands of years, Ingold said, assuming that it was the last ice age. Maybe longer. Because at some point the century hadn't come back. Wait, you're not this century? I asked, startled. No, the century is missing. What happened to them? Ingold asked. We don't know. Not Oscar drooped into a pantomime of despair. Why didn't they come back? Because they've all been killed. I asked, eaten by something. Not unless they were devoured whole. Some fragment would remain and return, and there are no predators on land that could do so. He brooded for a moment. A fire could burn them, or another of our kind could engulf them if they were smaller. We exchanged uneasy glances. Are there likely to be others of your kind about? Angus asked, as if it was of no particular merit. Not Oscar started to write something, then paused. After a moment, he wrote slowly, I do not think so. The other wholenesses thought we were foolish to go on land to escape the ice, and they would not know where to find us, but I cannot swear that it's impossible. Did any of you go looking? We did not know. The wholeness does not wake unless the century comes back. And they did not come back, so there was no reason to wake. This struck me as a very foolish system to set up, given everything that could happen to a single individual over the course of what sounded like millennia. Of course, maybe if they were nearly indestructible, you didn't worry about things like that. I tried to find them when we were fragmented, that Oscar wrote. I found signs, but they were not here. Where did they go? Not Oscar's own fragmentation had occurred when blasting in the mine had triggered a collapse far down in the cave system. Part of the wholeness had sheared off, and though the shock had woken it, it couldn't find its way back. The smooth, glassy surface that we encountered was an impermeable secretion meant to keep the wholeness from losing moisture. And not Oscar couldn't get through it. The irony of being able to see the object of his desire on the other side of that sheet of glass, of its own making, was painful. Though I don't think he understood irony as such. But if it was blasting that did it, then the mine must have been in operation, Denton said. Which was, what, 100 years ago? It had been more than that. Not Oscar had seen the second and third shaft sunk. He'd watched the miners for decades, first learning that the strange animals communicate through sound, then learning that those sounds mapped into written words. Apparently one miner had read aloud to his friends during breaks, and that had sparked the initial understanding. After that, not Oscar's vocabulary had spread by leaps and bounds, though it never mastered the art of speech. Too hard, he wrote. Too many parts that vibrate. Which made me stop and think about how exactly my lips and tongue worked, and the way things moved in my throat, which led me to thinking about how often I swallowed, which is the sort of things that drives you batty in a very short order. How do your people live so long? Ingold wanted to know, which led to another spat of questions that made very little sense to me. The upshot seemed to be that the wholeness could revert part of itself to, well, infancy. Probably wasn't the right word. A younger state of sorts. This wiped out that part's memories, but it could then rejoin the wholeness and relearn what it had forgotten. So it's effectively immortal, said Denton, sounding grimmer still. He turned to Not Oscar with sudden ferocity. Why are you telling us all this? Ingold and Not Oscar stared at him with almost identically blank expressions, as if neither of them understood the question. Not Oscar wrote one-handed and somewhat hesitantly, You asked. Denton threw his hands in the air and walked away. Ingold looked after him, clearly wondering if he should follow, but before he could move, Kent arose from his seat by the fire and went after his employer. I hoped that he was as efficient in settling nerves as he was at everything else. Not Oscar stood very still, holding his slate, and probably it was unwise to project human emotions on what was effectively some kind of land jellyfish. But he seemed forlorn. I suppose nobody yells at you when you're a jellyfish. What do we call you? I asked the creature, partly to distract it, but it also didn't seem right to keep thinking of him as Not Oscar. Do you have a name other than Wholeness? The creature shook its head. Wholeness it is, Ingold said. What about you, though? I asked. We are a wholeness. No, I said, not all of you. You. The bit that we're talking to, not the wholeness. The way that I'm Easton and he's Ingold and he's Angus. Not Oscar thought about this for quite some time. I wondered if I'd asked a question he couldn't answer or one he didn't understand. And then finally, he picked up the pen and wrote, in his clear, slanting hand, You may call me Fragment. And that's chapter 11. That is super fucking interesting, actually. I feel like I've read... There's a malevolent version of this in one of my favorite books by Dean Koontz called Phantoms. There's a malevolent version of this, but it kind of absorbs things around it into itself, but not like small krill. But like the way he's describing the way it looks and that it's been alive for primordial amounts of time has me... It's got me reminiscing on that creature and picturing it the same way. But like a sheet of gelatinous consciousness? That's cool. That's cool as fuck. That's a cool thing to have. I'll get some water and we'll start on chapter 12 here shortly. Small break, small break. Everybody get your water. Get resituated, get your snacks. All right, we're back. Everybody ready? Everybody ready for chapter 12? We got 3 more chapters left. We got 12, 13, well, 4 chapters, 12, 13, 14, and 15. Chapter 12. In addition to broth, Fragment could eat meat ground into a fine paste so long as it had plenty of water. This would have made me nervous again, except that apparently he couldn't actually chew because his teeth were made of the same substance as the rest of him. Too soft. No bones, he wrote. Must use sticks. Ingold, who had lost all fear in favor of fascination, asked him to demonstrate, and to my shock and horror, Fragment pushed up his sleeve, held out his arm, and it melted. The flesh simply dropped away and gummy strings dangled below the arm, revealing a stick with bark still attached. You've got sticks for bones? Angus said. Fragment nodded. Can't walk well otherwise. As I watched, the long strings hanging from his arm reversed themselves, crawling upward over one another, and braiding themselves back into flesh. It was both amazing and dreadful to watch. It also explained why, when I had seen Fragment floating along the ground, he had been a human-shaped lump atop him. It had been the bones sticking in flesh. It had been the bones sticks and enough flesh to hold them together, while the main body of the creature went slithering along the ground. It's true what they say. You can get used to anything. It was still deeply, viscerally alien, but my sheer horror was fading the longer the Fragment talked to us. So you don't have any teeth, either, Ingold was saying, as Denton and Kent returned. Denton still looked tensed. Can't imagine why. No, tried rocks, but they just pushed through jaw. He could probably drink blood, said Ingold musingly. Though I doubt it would sustain him long. Organ meats processed into a fine slurry would likely work better. Is it a coronary you're trying to give me? Angus demanded. Used other rocks to grind fish, Fragment offered. Fascinating as this is, said Denton testily. Will you excuse us for a moment? I'd like to confer with my colleagues in private. Fragment gave one of his exaggerated nods and Denton hustled us all inside the mouth of the mine. I looked over my shoulder and saw the creature standing by the table, hands dangling limply at its sides. Can he still hear us, do you think? Said Denton in an undertone. Ingold frowned. I don't think he can, he said. His hearing is not so good as ours. His ears aren't real. Well, they're real, but they're not real ears. Sound comes in through his entire body. I think that would make him able to hear better, said Angus. Actually, no. Ingold had that enthusiastic light blazing in his eyes again. Human ears are quite marvelously complicated. They funnel sounds into membranes that vibrate against tiny little bones. Really, if you took your ear apart, you'd be astonished. No doubt, Angus muttered. Fragment doesn't have any of that. His skin can't vibrate the same way because it's busy being skin, and a few other things as well. It's amazing he can hear us as well as he does, or walk, or anything else. Ingold spread his hands. As far as I can tell, the most specialized cells he has are the chromatophores, and the ones that produce bioluminescent glow. His muscles have to be muscles and nerve cells and move food around and do all the things that our bodies have specialized cells to do. And that doesn't even get into how they all seem to be some kind of gestalt consciousness, which of course is incredible by itself. Denton held up a hand before Ingold could tear off into another tangent. Did he kill Oscar? Ingold blinked a few times. I could practically hear the squeal of brakes being applied to his train of thought. There's no way to know, he said finally. He was certainly in the mine. He clearly saw Oscar up close, although that could have been at any time. His eyes actually do work, interestingly enough. He says he studied a dead possum's eyes and figured out how they worked, although he's using pond water in place of aqueous humor. This time I was the one who broke in. Is he the one who's been killing people over at the camp? Denton turned his head toward me sharply. I spread my hands. It was the bit about organ meat turned into slurry. The corpse we saw had its organs pulled out like someone shucking an oyster. I'd be very surprised if he was. He said. Ingold said, he doesn't have real bones. You don't use your bones to kill people, Angus said dryly. You do, though. Ingold's eyes started to light up again, and Angus threw me a look of exasperated amusement. Most of your muscles have to have your bones to anchor them and push against. Imagine trying to punch someone with your tongue. That's what it's like for Fragment. There was a pause while he gave this particularly vivid mental image, and the credit it deserved. I opened my mouth to mention a young lady of my acquaintance in Paris, but caught a glimpse of Denton's expression and closed it again. Fragment's using a makeshift wooden skeleton so that he can walk, Ingold said, but he's significantly weaker and slower than a human. The only way that I could see him overpowering someone is if there was a lot more of him somewhere. Angus spoke for all of us when he said, huh? Ingold glanced around at us. Surely that occurred to you. I think that it's fairly safe to say that you're ahead of us again, said Denton wearily. Well, there's no reason that he has to be the size of a human, is there? Said Ingold. We know that the wholeness itself is huge. How big a chunk was broken off? There could be a room filled with fragments somewhere that he rejoins occasionally. I can't swear to it, but I suspect that Denton, Angus, and I were forcibly reminded of that tarn and the fungal intelligence within it. It had sent out bits of itself to possess the bodies of hares, other things, which then returned to the dark water to rejoin the larger body. We know he can use tools, Ingold said blithely, so if there was a lot more of him, he wouldn't really need bones. He'd just need to engulf someone until they suffocated, then scrape the guts out with a sharp knife. There was a second pause while we contemplated this image. I did not like it. Judging by their expressions, neither did anyone else. How do we find out if there's more of him? Denton asked. You could ask him. Ingold shrugged. He's been remarkably forthcoming so far. If he's telling the truth, Denton said. Hell, he's not even a he, is he? He's an it. Everyone looked at me for some reason. Fine, I know the reason. I'm just saying that Angus speaks Galatian as well as I do. They could look at him instead. I rolled my eyes. Don't ask me. Galatian doesn't have anything for it. I don't know, intelligent land jellyfish? Granted, if any language would, it would be ours. Still. He's choosing to appear as male, so he's as good as anything. Ingold rubbed the back of his neck. Anyway, I don't get the impression that he's lying about anything. I don't think he understands lying very well. He was pretending to be Oscar. Denton's voice sounded as if he had been chipped out of flint. Yes, but that wasn't a lie exactly. It was mimicry, imitating something that isn't the same. species imitates things all the time. Shark was coming toward them, they'd pretend to be another shark so that it wouldn't try to eat them. It was more defensive. Even the telegram he sent was basically mimicking Oscar's so that we wouldn't come back. Denton grimaced. Ingold hurried on. I'm inclined to think he's exactly what he says he is. If nothing else, he's too weird to lie about. The doctor folded his arms. Have you learned enough about how to kill him? Ingold blinked. What? If he killed Oscar, and if he's responsible for the killings over in the camp, we're not just leaving him here to keep doing it. So, how do we kill him? But the loss to science. Science be damned, snarled Denton. I'm not leaving a murderous, whatever that is, loose. Why is everyone's first response to a stranger to kill them? Ingold shot back, his hands clenching into fists. Now seemed like a good time to put my foot in it. If nothing else, I can give both of them someone else to be mad at. I held up both hands and stepped between them, in the pose colloquially known as the first one to get punched. Stand down, both of you, I said. Nobody's killing anyone right this minute, all right? We don't know what that fragment's done, anything to anybody. And even if we wanted to, we can't get through that shell over the wholeness, unless someone has been smuggling dynamite in their trousers. The joke fell flat, but I kept talking anyway. Ingold, you yourself admitted fragment could be dangerous. I'd like to know how we protect ourselves from... I would like to know how we protect ourselves if he is. I don't think that's terribly unreasonable, eh? Ingold grimaced and looked over my shoulder at Angus. Angus said, it's a fair question, lad. Knowing how doesn't mean we've got to do it. I'm sure when I get glared at. sure when I say I get glared at. But if Angus says it, suddenly it's sweet reason. Shooting him won't do much, said Ingold reluctantly, not looking at Denton. It damaged the tissues in the immediate area of the wound, and that's all. And there'd be even less point in stabbing him. He said fire would work, if you believe him. Fire works on nearly everything, I pointed out. Denton grunted. Ingold folded his arms. I really don't think he means us any harm. Then what does he want? Ingold looked up with an awkward smile. Actually, I think he needs our help. He wants us to open up a hole to more of them? I asked. He can't do it himself, Ingold said. The way his muscles work and as hard as that stuff is, it would take him centuries to drill through by hand. And dynamite would hurt the wholeness. Ingold put a thoughtful finger to his lips. Of course, if he was using a plain steel bit, it's very possible that with one of the new diamond bits we could... No, Denton snapped. Absolutely not. Isn't one enough? He isn't one, though, Ingold said. He's part of a group and he's been cut off from it. Like bringing a bee back to the hive. Yeah, by opening the door to a swarm of bees. He and Ingold stared at each other, neither backing down. I shuffled a half step back, not wanting to get in the middle of the competing glares. Angus gave me an I see what you're doing look, cleared his throat, and said, we don't have to decide right now. Let's have some dinner, shall we? I looked around, startled, and realized that dusk was already lurking in the corners of the cavern. That's a good idea, I said with false heartiness. Famished. We ate in silence. Kent pressed fragment with a cup of chicken broth. Kent presented fragment with a cup of chicken broth. The fragment accepted, writing thank you on his slate. I imagined all sorts of horrible ways he might eat this stuff, but he simply drank out of the cup, although he never seemed to swallow. As soon as he was finished, Denton put his dishes down and stalked out of the mine. I was nearly done, so I said, my turn, and went after him. He hadn't gone far, just out of sight of the entrance. He glanced over at me, and I waited to see if he was going to tell me to go away. I don't think he knew either. Hope dies hard in the best of moments, and Denton's hope had died harder than most. Eventually he sighed, took a slug from a small silver flask, and told me to pull up a rock. We sat in silence for a while the insects buzzed and rattled in the trees. Denton took out a cigarette and patted himself for a light. I pulled out my lighter and flicked my wrist open to snap it open. I flicked my wrist to snap it open and light the flame in one motion. If you do it right, it looks very suave. I used to practice it for hours as a teenager in hopes of impressing girls. Look, girls were more easily impressed in those days. Shut up. I hate this, Denton said. I hate this so much. I stretched out a hand and he pressed the flask into it. It was bourbon, which I didn't much care for, but we weren't drinking for aesthetic appreciation. I downed a slug and passed it back. Do you remember what it was like coming home after the war? Denton asked unexpectedly. Of course. He took another sip from the flask. Home is where you're supposed to be safe. But if something like that could happen, then how could any of us be safe anywhere? I grunted. It hadn't been quite like that for me, but I understood it. Meanwhile, the whippoorwill had started up and was caroling monotonously somewhere out in the darkness. But I got over that, you know? It took some time, but I stopped expecting someone to burst through the door and demand that I operate right now. I could come home and close the door and just be there. I grunted again. I don't have many social skills, but I can tell when someone is spilling their guts and I should keep my mouth shut and let it happen. And then, after Usher's Lake, he gestured vaguely eastward with the flask, presumably toward the side of our shared horror. I kept thinking that if creatures like that existed and no one could ever be safe anywhere again, anyone could turn out to be one of them. Yeah. It was like I couldn't go home. Kept waiting for the door to open and something horrible to come through. His laugh was soft and humorless. It wasn't until Ingold convinced me that something like the Tarn wouldn't happen twice, that we'd killed it and it was really over, that I was able to feel safe again. He pressed the metal of the flask against his forehead, perhaps to cool it. And now it's happening again, except that my dearest friend is on the other side of this monster. This time. Excuse me. Except that my dearest friend is on the side of this monster this time. I feel like I'm going mad. You're not, I said. This is all... I tried to find a word and failed miserably. Denton nodded, though. Maybe we'd come to a place where no words in English or Galatian could describe what was happening to us. Yeah, he said. Yeah. He stared at nothing a little while. Am I ever going to be able to go home again? I knew he wasn't talking about Boston. I didn't have an answer. I realized that I hadn't heard the whippoorwill for some time. I was trying to think of something that I could say that would give Denton a small slice of strength, enough to get through the next bit of hell when we heard the horses screaming. The sound of a horse in panic will bring a former cavalry officer to their feet if they're dead asleep, dead drunk, or just plain dead. Being none of those things, I was tearing across the hillside to where we'd picketed the horses before the echoes of the first scream had died away. I was the first one on the scene, but since I'd neglected to bring a light, all I saw was a dim, confused jumble of plunging horses. Angus was second, and he'd had the wit to grab a lantern. The light bounced as he ran, briefly illuminating glimpses of long legs and eyes rolling frantic white, and a great dark shape clinging to the back of the nearest. Something huge with long clawed arms sunk into the screaming horse's sides. Angus and I fired at the same moment. One of us hit, probably Angus. My shot went high, I'm sure. So the last thing I wanted to do was hit the horse. The shape jerked, clung for a moment longer, then retreated off, far side. I say retreated because it wasn't a fall. I could almost see it decide that it wasn't worth it and choose to leave. I gave chase for a dozen steps, then stopped, confounded by the darkness and shadows of the trees. Got away, I said unnecessarily, returning. But it's injured. We should see blood in the morning. Maybe we can track it. Angus grunted. He was already trying to soothe the creature's victim, who was not inclined to be soothed. Ken joined us a moment later, and between the three of us we managed to quiet the horses, though they were still skittish and jumped at every move. I felt much the same way. Was it a bear? Didn't want us to know. It didn't look like the bears we have in Galatia, but yours are all small and black, aren't they? So maybe? Shrugged helplessly. I hadn't seen any details at all, not even the gleam of the eyes. It was a damn strange thing anyway. The mare, my mare, as it turned out, was not badly hurt. She had 2 long slashes raked across her ribs on either side, but it looked as if the creature had only just secured a grip before we ran it off. Denton and Angus did what they could, and Kent made plans to take her back to the livery stable? I never understood how to say that out loud. In the morning, so that she could get better care than what we could offer out here. In all the excitement, we'd almost forgotten Fragment. Or at least I had. It wasn't until I was preparing for bed that I heard Ingold and Denton arguing in low voices. Fragment was with me the whole time. That bit of him was. You said yourself there might be more. I asked him. He said he could barely feed as much of himself as there was. He's almost completely hollow inside. Did you know that? And you believed what he said? Denton, we have no reason to... that we know of. I pulled the blanket over my head to drown them out. In the morning, even though we scoured the hillside, there was no trace of blood to be found. And that's chapter 12. Lord, the excitement is doing my heart some bounds. So we know there's an enemy shifter now. There's an enemy blob. There's a gelatinous predator out there scooping out people's organs and grinding up the organ meat, presumably. Filter feeding on ground organ meat from, I guess, whatever it wants. What a terrible fucking thought. See, that's the part that reminds me of the blob, or the thing from I don't think they ever gave it a name. The Creature from Phantoms by Dean Koontz. Another great read, which I may pick up because I love that book. And I know how to read it. This is the reason you hear me stuttering and rereading sentences in this. I've never read any of this. This is all new to me too. But Phantoms I've read, so I feel like I'd be more confident with with recording that one. What an exciting tale we've had so far. We've got a couple more chapters to go. Just a few more pages, and we'll be just about done. That'll be the end of our third book. Chapter 13. Denton was dead set on Ingold not being alone with Fragment, and since not even I believe that I'm more competent than Angus, he stayed with them fucked it up. Excited. She's excited. Let me start that over. I fucking fumbled the first sentence. Been reading for a while now. Chapter 13. Denton was dead set on Ingold not being alone with Fragment, and since not even I believe that I'm more competent than Angus, he stayed with them while Kent took the mare back, and I accompanied Denton to check on his patient with the mangled arm. It was a lovely, crisp fall day. The leaves, already brilliant, were glowing in shades to eclipse even the most extravagant dye. Elijah was glad to see us, and Denton went inside the shed while I sat on the step and petted the hound again. In daylight, it was clear that she was female. I had just found the spot to get her hind leg going when somebody leapt to her feet, when she suddenly leapt to her feet and gave a thin thread of a whine, then vanished under the steps. What's wrong, girl? I leaned to look over at her. She came out of her hiding spot, barked almost soundlessly at me, then retreated. In dog, this means, yes, something is wrong, and you should be hiding. If she'd been something is wrong and you need to fix it, the bark would have been much louder. A moment later, my ears caught the crunch of feet on gravel, and I watched Roger and his dog approach. Christ's blood, but that beast was enormous. For a moment I wondered, but no, dogs bite out the throats and belly. They wouldn't leap onto a horse's back. And even as gigantic as Thunder was, it wasn't the size of the thing I'd seen the night before. Roger waved to me and I lifted a hand. Thunder didn't look in my direction, which was just as well. It wasn't until they were gone and the brown hound had emerged, ears flattened, that I wondered if the reason I found Thunder so unsettling was that his ears didn't move at all. Denton's patient was recovering better than he expected, so he was in a good mood as we returned. But it faded as soon as we reached the mine. He saw Fragment and Ingold together and his lip curled up as if scenting something rancid. He hasn't done anything hostile, I said. Don't trust him. He's not human. What's to say he won't just turn on us without thinking twice? Not out of malice, but because, I don't know, it's the season where they all murder each other. I suspect Ingold would have learned if a season like that existed by now. Denton hunched his shoulders deeper into his coat. Thought crossed my mind that some of Denton's hostility was not directed at Fragment so much as Ingold and Fragment together. Which was a thought that tied back to some other things that I'd half noticed and made me wonder. Nope, none of my business. Nevertheless, an hour or two later, when Fragment wrote that he wished to visit the Wholeness, I volunteered to go with him before Ingold could. It's fine, I said. I don't mind. I couldn't help but notice that Denton didn't object to Fragment and I being alone together. Possibly the thought that I could defend myself more effectively, or possibly... Nope, still none of my business. Are you upset with me, Alex Easton? Fragment wrote after we'd threaded our way through the tunnels on the 3rd level. No. Which was true. Overall, Fragment seemed so harmless that it was hard to stay frightened. My gut kept insisting that he wasn't a threat. Denton would probably say that my various body parts had no experience with something like Fragment. And he wouldn't be wrong, but it was still hard to overrule the feeling. It had kept me alive too many times. I apologize. I still do not read humans well. Oh, I rubbed the back of my neck. No, it's not you. It's all the weight overhead. It bothers me. He stopped. Should we go back? No. I'm used to it. I kept walking. Sooner we get there, sooner we get back up. Why did you come if you do not like the stone? To prove a mountain can't tell me what to do. I do not understand. Neither do I said, sighing. But I'm here anyway. I didn't let Fragment go down that undulating tunnel of a crawl space without me. Excuse me, I did let Fragment go down that undulating tunnel of a crawl space without me. Denton could yell at me if he didn't come back. But it's not as if Fragment was our prisoner. How do you keep a prisoner that can ditch bones and turn into goo? He returned an hour later, reforming himself out of the narrow opening. I caught a glimpse of clear, wet slime sliding into the coat and filling it out and looked away. My skin crawled, but my gut said, it's only Fragment. I wondered which one of them I should be listening to. Ready? I asked. Yes. Thank you. Fragment paused, then added, I cannot touch the wholeness, but it comforts me to know that it is still there. Feel the same way about Catholicism, I said, and explained that kept me talking, and explaining that kept me talking until we reached the main shaft. Voices came from above as we made our way upward. It took me a moment to place one as Roger, and I thought on what you had said, Doc and Mr. Oscar. He never would have given up on me, and here I was giving up on him and myself, too. Stay human, murmured a Fragment, who nodded. I'm glad you're doing better, Denton said. Fragment stepped out of the shaft ahead of me. I was looking up, seeing his shape silhouetted against the light, when something happened. I heard a roar, the sound of running feet, and a shout that came out of the shaft at exactly the wrong moment. Or exactly the right one, depending on how you look at it, I suppose. Fragment half turned, his body starting to melt away, and all I could think was, Christ, blood, don't let Roger see. I jumped in front of him, and then something huge and heavy barreled into me, knocking me backwards. Felt like I'd stepped in the way of a galloping horse. I don't think it was expecting resistance, and I certainly wasn't expecting to be hit, so neither of us were in control of the next bit, where we fell backwards into the shaft, rolled over several times, and I somehow wound up on top, straddling a dog? It was Roger's dog, Thunder. Teeth gleamed white in the dark, snaking toward my face. I shoved myself back, not certain if I was injured from the initial blow or not. I didn't want to hurt a dog, but Thunder clearly didn't feel the same way about me. Those teeth snapped shut an inch from my face. Christ's blood, I thought. It's rabies. I jammed my arm into the dog's throat, trying to pin him to the ground, but the beast heaved and nearly threw me off entirely. Was it so big? I would have sworn Thunder was a large dog, but the animal under me seemed as big as a pony. No, someone was saying. Bad dog, bad dog. I recognized my own voice after a moment, for all the good I was doing. I managed to get my arm across Thunder's neck, and threw my whole weight against it. The next snap of the teeth was farther away from my face, although not nearly far enough. Fragment, get out of the way, Angus shouted, and I thought, oh, thank God, Angus can shoot it before I get rabies too. I then remembered that I was fighting a black dog in a dark mine shaft, and any relief was probably premature. The dog heaved again, and then something happened in the vicinity of my chest. Something very bad. I was still wearing my headlamp, so I saw with horrible clarity how his sternum pushed upward and then split in half. Long black strings unbraided themselves from bone, and the bones themselves pushed forward. I had a sickening glimpse of Thunder's ribs, and then they were no longer ribs, but jagged teeth, and a vertical maw knitted together by slick black flesh that writhed away from gums. That writhed away like gums, good God. I would like to tell you that in that moment, I knew that it was no dog, but all, God, I knew that it was no dog at all, but the missing sentry. But clearly I didn't know because I could still hear myself screaming, no, bad dog. And the horror at what I was seeing was all mixed up with the horror that I had somehow caused all this. Had broken the poor beast's ribs myself and sentenced him to a lingering agony. This lasted right up to the point where the new mouth flexed upwards and bit into my gut. The thick oilskin coat saved me. I felt the jagged bone ends clutch at me, seeking purchase. Felt them slide along the fabric. And then a gun went off so close to me that the powder burned my skin and I fell backward off that thing. That clearly wasn't a dog at all. You'd probably figured that out already. My only defense is a fundamental belief that dogs are inherently good and Thunder must therefore be good. And if he hadn't liked me, it was probably a failure on my part. I have a great belief in the stopping power of bullets. Mostly I believe that they don't stop nearly enough. Certainly this one didn't. The bullet went through not Thunder's head and blew out the back, trailing black strings behind it. But by the time I had scrambled to my feet, the strings were already re-knitting themselves, and though the head looked at... Oh, God. Sorry. Oh, God, this next line was creepy. And though the head looked as if once I had been crushed, the rest of the creature didn't even seem to notice. At that moment, I should have run away. I was aware that even at that time... But I was furious, deeply and unexpectedly furious, because how dare this monster impersonate a dog? I think I screamed something to that effect, but probably it was in Galatian. Nevertheless, Sentry faced me, even as it reared up on impossibly long legs. Christ's blood, it was really huge. Thunder hadn't been that big before. I would swear. It shook itself, and the mouth in its chest flexed again. In a voice that was half bark, half gurgle, it cried, "I will not be whole." Angus, of course it was Angus, fired again, and the creature staggered, but it didn't fall. It turned toward him, snapping both sets of teeth, and gathered itself to spring. "Out of the way!" shouted Ingold, with the courage I had always suspected he possessed. He flung himself between Angus and Sentry, far too close. So close that the upper teeth actually closed over his arm, but he didn't falter. His free hand came up holding an oil lamp, and he smashed it down over the creature's back. Burning oil ran over it, and it fell back against the wall and slid downward. Ingold tore his arm free and slapped at the splashes of oil on his clothes. The burning Sentry was between me and them, so I had no idea how badly injured he might be. What I did see, with horrible clarity, was how Sentry dealt with burning. Its skin rose up like dozens of fleshy fingers, more strings pulling away from the bone, and then it simply sloughed half its body away. The burning half fell to the ground, and the creature dragged what was left of itself away from the fire, sacrificing its own flesh to smother the flames. A beam of light carved an erratic zigzag over the wall. Oh, shit. Sorry, this whole thing's got me, got my skin crawling. The beam of light carved an erratic zigzag over the wall. I half turned and saw that it was a headlamp bouncing on the ground, rolling down the shaft. Fragment's headlamp followed by Fragment's pants? I thought that the creature had fled, but apparently he'd just been undressing. Then Fragment pushed by me, still changing as he went. His flesh pulled away, the sticks that made up his bones clattered to the floor. By the time he reached Sentry, he was only vaguely human-shaped. He lifted his arms, and a thick membrane hung down from them like wings. He fell over what remained of Sentry, arms outstretched, and I watched the membrane flow over the other like a second skin. Sentry struggled wildly against Fragment's smothering embrace. I saw the thrashing as Fragment enclosed him in a translucent sack, and then I could see the outlines of bones against the membrane. I took a step forward, wanting to help, but not knowing how. It soon became obvious that my help wasn't required. Sentry had been huge, but he had lost half of himself to the flame, and now Fragment was twice as large as he was. I staggered past them, up the shaft, to where Angus and Ingold were watching. Angus had his gun out, but Ingold pushed it down with his good hand. I don't think you should break fragments or seal right now. What's he doing? I asked, and then, Christ blood, your arm. It'll need stitches, he admitted. He had his arm pressed against his side, but it could be worse. And in answer to your question, I think he's, engulfing him. Eating him? Or merging with him, if you like. But that thing's a murderer, and pretended to be a dog. Yes, said Ingold, but Fragment outnumbers him right now. Presumably, that will dilute some of the murderousness. Red light flashed inside the sack, irregularly at first, then slowing to a dull red pulse as Century struggles died down. We stayed well back. From the top of the shaft, I heard Roger saying, "But my dog went down there." And Ken's voice answering, too low to make out. Good. Keep him away from all this, and we'll make up a story somehow. Then more footsteps, and Denton was there holding a lantern in a box. No, one of the box-shaped oil cans. Pushed past us, lifting it up, and it took me a moment to realize that he intended to douse both the creatures with it. No, I grabbed for him, missed my footing on the slope, and skidded practically into Fragment before I stopped myself. Didn't stop. Fragment's got him. It's under control. That's both of them there? Denton asked. And when I nodded, good, then we can deal with this once and for all. He pulled the cap off the oil can. I'm not always the quickest person on the uptake, and so I said, what? He means to kill them both, Ingold said. Denton, no. Think of what you're doing. I am thinking. I'm thinking that we have both of them here at once, and we can end all of this right now. I darted a glance over my shoulder. Fragment and what was left of Century were still lying in a heap of indistinguished flesh. They could get away, and if Ingold or Angus grabbed for Denton, he'd spill the oil or drop the lantern and set them on fire anyway. Which meant the only person who could stop him was me. Was I really going to risk being burned alive to save an alien being more closely related to a jellyfish than a human? Apparently I was. I spread my arms and said, Denton, don't do this. Isn't right. I never thought you, Balk, doing what you of all people. Necessary, yes, I said. Fragment saved my life just now, and you want me to pay that back with murder? My cousin is dead, and now we know what did it, Ingold broke in. Fragment's dealing with it. Oscar's at peace. Can be at peace too. Peace? Denton sounded incredulous. When it's down there, able to look like any of us, just like that thing in the lake. It's nothing like the thing in the lake, I shot back. You've met Fragment. He's had years to practice, and he still couldn't pretend to be one of us for more than 5 minutes. He won't last 10 minutes outside of the mine. Denton didn't look convinced. I tried another tactic. Denton, I don't know what oath they made doctors swear over here, but in Galatia, ours says, first, do no harm. The oil gurgled in his hand, trembled in the oil can. Angus met my eyes over his shoulder and looked a question at me. I shook my head. I couldn't see any way to rush. Then that didn't end with somebody being burned alive. Probably me. We could end all this now, said Denton. Finally, his voice cracking. We could stop it and just go home. It was the cry of every soldier I'd ever served with. Just let this stop happening and let us go home. I'd like to say that I said something eloquent, that I made an argument that changed Denton's mind, but it wasn't me. It was Ingold who put his hand on Denton's arm and said very gently, "That's all Fragment wants. To go home. To his people. Let us help, and then we'll go home to ours." "I don't want that," Denton said miserably. You don't want that," Denton said miserably. "You think this awful alien thing is wonderful. I would give up every wonderful thing to go home with you," said Ingold. Denton let out a sob and turned, and Ingold's arms went around him, which confirmed a few things I'd been wondering about. And Angus, sensibly, took away the oil can. And that's 13. Woo, what a sequence of events. But there's two full chapters left. And I think this can't be the end of it. Something tells me there's more to know. More to happen here. No, wait, it's 2 chapters of exposition. or after the big win. I'm gonna go grab another water. I will be right back. All right, thank you for your patience. And so we begin chapter 14. Fragment reassembled an hour or so later, which was just about enough time to finish explaining everything to Roger. I would have preferred to skip that bit, but he'd gotten past Kent and seen enough to not be put off easily. Also, there was the matter of Thunder. You said you found him near the mine? Ingold asked. Yeah. Ate like a horse, but the best dog. Watched over me, drunk or sober. Are you saying that this thing replaced him? Ingold and I exchanged glances. It's possible that it always was him, Ingold said gently. But he was a dog. This creature could look like a dog. Why did it look like my dog? We went around this 3 or 4 times, until Fragment finally appeared and Ingold gratefully seized on the interruption. Did you learn anything? He asked. No. Sentry did not wish to join with me. What does that mean, in practical terms? I do not know. It has never happened before. But I would not force a joining. He wiped the slate clean and wrote, Could he have gone mad from loneliness? I'm no expert on your people, Fragment. I don't know. Happens to humans, I offered. But he did not have to be alone. Fragment underlined the word be twice. I could see a faint red radiance coming from the skin that wasn't covered by clothes or goggles. Ingold got the haunted look of a man trying to explain psychology to an alien jellyfish creature. It's rare, but you know it when you see it. It's complicated, Fragment. Sometimes when people are hurt for a long time, they start to think that hurting is part of who they are. And then anything that helps the hurt, even healing, feels like it's trying to strip part of them away. This gave both Fragment and I something to think about. Roger, however, was not given to such introspection. But why did you take my dog? Fragment wrote, Perhaps he was less lonely being your dog? I bit my lip. Ingold winced. Roger stared at the slate, blinked twice, then burst into tears. It's all right, I told Fragment wearily, after Kent and Angus had taken Roger away to recover himself. You didn't know. But I did not mean to distress him. I know you didn't. I patted his arm, unthinking, and felt the flesh give a little too much, which made me realize that I treated him as I would an upset human. It's true what they say, I supposed. You can get used to anything. I suppose if settling into pleasant debauchery doesn't work as a career, I can hire myself out as an alien ambassador. Ingold stepped into the written... Oh my god. Ingold stepped into the written recriminations and said, Fragment, I've been meaning to ask you why you glow red sometimes. That was what let us find you in the first place. Fragment turned his goggles in Ingold's direction. It is like humans talking, he wrote. If a human is alone, it talks to pretend another human is talking. I started to protest that wasn't why humans talk to themselves, then realized I couldn't possibly explain all the nuance, then further realized that I didn't understand all the nuance myself and shut my mouth. Wholeness glows. Fragment tapped the chalk against the slate. I wondered if that was an actual nervous tick or if he was imitating something he'd seen humans do. I do not always realize I am glowing. An unconscious behavior, murmured Ingold. Fascinating. But I'm curious about the mechanism. Can you glow deliberately? Red light began to leak from Fragment's skin in answer. Amazing. And this is a specialized kind of cell, or... Ingold and Fragment rapidly descended into jargon, all about bioluminescence and St. Elmo's fire. In Galatia, we call it the candles of St. David. I gave up and went out to check on the horses, to find Denton already there. The doctor flushed when he saw me and looked away. Easton, Alex, I held up a hand. You didn't do it. All that matters. He stopped, cigarette halfway to his mouth. But I did do it. Many times. We stared at each other in baffled silence. I'm talking about dumping oil on me and Fragment. Oh, I meant, John and I. He was turning red behind his beard. Oh, that. Christ's blood, did you think I cared? Americans were so bizarre. Then I do not know about anyone else's military, but if half the Galatian troops weren't tossing each other off occasionally, I'd worry we weren't getting enough to eat. Den's explosive snort unfortunately coincided with him taking a puff at the cigarette, and he choked. I pounded him on the back until he could breathe again. The horses eyed us with grave suspicion. I mean that, yes, the doctor said. But I didn't know he felt that way. I thought it was just that, well, I was there and convenient. We didn't talk about it. And now you know. So that's all right then. And now we were talking about feelings. I would almost rather he had poured burning oil onto me. Denton grunted. I slapped him on the back again and fled. It's odd, said Ingold at dinner that night. What's odd? Angus asked. I almost asked what wasn't, but restrained myself. Ingold shrugged. Just, why was Century taking all that meat? That much food would last Fragment for a month. 2 months. And it would take days to ingest. I thought you said they couldn't eat a meal, Denton said accusingly. No, I said they couldn't digest. Something like our stomach acid would eat right through them. But Century was actually very clever. He used gizzard stones. He looked around at us triumphantly. I attempted to look suitably impressed, but clearly failed, because Ingold sighed and said, a bird. He made a crop, filled it with rocks, and let them roll around and grind the meat up. Then when the pieces were small enough, they'd pass into a water-filtered stomach and become something he could ingest. And of course he was using an actual skeleton so he could chew it and begin with. In fact, he'd made some modifications to the basic canine skeleton. I imagine when he first began killing people at the shantytown, he was taking bones as well as organs. I put my food down and pushed it away. I had not even considered such a thing. Fragment frowned. Century was much smarter than I am, and he could even talk a little. I do not know how. I wonder if he had a syrinx like a bird, Ingold mused. You're not out there stealing other creatures' bones, said Angus, before Ingold could launch into a treatise on comparative avian anatomy. That's the important thing. It is? Rules of life, Angus said. Be true to your friends, don't cheat at cards, don't piss on the less fortunate, and don't steal other people's skeletons. You added that last bit just now, I said. Obviously should have been there all along. He leaned back. Now, gents, since we can't use dynamite, how do we propose to get Fragment to the other side of his people? I'll spare you the details of the next few days, since most of it was spent tracking down a diamond core bit. Apparently most of them were attached to steam-powered machines. Who knew? It was a good thing we were in a coal country, because Kent eventually found one. Excuse me. Because Kent eventually found one. If we'd been in Galatia, he'd still be looking. Ingold and Fragment stayed thick as thieves, but in the evening, Ingold would stop and go sit outside with Denton. I assumed they were working out the details of their old-turned-new relationship. I also assumed that it was none of my goddamn business. The diamond bit cut nicely into the shell around the wholeness. Still wasn't easy, mind you. Everyone took a turn turning the drill handle and cursing, but it made an inch and then another inch and then another inch, and then we all sat around with aching arms and tried to ignore the white faces on the floor mimicking our expressions. Denton didn't take part in this. No one blamed him. He was trying very hard, and at least he knew his limits. Why do they do that? Asked Ingold, gesturing at the brilliant floor. We'd brought blankets down to sit on, partly because the floor was hard, but mostly because it was extremely unsettling to sit on a floor that was imitating you. The blankets looked very small and shabby in that pearl and limestone chamber of so much glory. I clung to mine with deep relief. It is protection. If a shark comes, the wholeness looks like a larger shark, so that it will not be food. Even dreaming, the wholeness protects itself. Fragment waited until we had read the slate and then wiped it clean and began writing again. With most beings, it is enough just to look like the head or even just the eyes. Oh, of course, Ingle slapped the blanket. Like the moths with wings that looked like eyes to scare predators away. The wholeness tries to look like a bigger human to frighten us off. Several pearlescent versions of him celebrated this with open-mouth delight. I looked away. We're running low on water, Angus said, turning his canteen to hear the slosh. I'll go get some, I volunteered. I didn't like the crawl, but I'd gotten used to it, and now it was only skin crawling, not vomit-inducingly awful. We'd all gotten a little lackadaisical about going around the mine in pairs by this point, but no one stopped me. I made my way out of the tunnels, back to the main shaft, and began whistling an old Galatian tune about the milkmaid and the virtuous Wolverine. I had just gotten to the bit where he offers to scratch the itch she cannot scratch herself when I heard a grinding noise and looked up. A wall was slowly falling on top of me. It was a wall of flesh, not stone. It extruded itself out of the mouth of the second-level shaft, grabbing at the ground and pulling itself toward the things that were not quite tentacles, but definitely not feet. It had dozens of eyes and hundreds of mouths that opened and closed and reformed elsewhere on the body. Bones stuck out and were turned into hooks to keep dragging itself forward, yard after yard of anonymous meat pouring out of this tunnel, seemingly with no end in sight. Ah, I thought very calmly. So that's what Sentry was doing with all the extra meat. Meat seemed like the best word. It was the color of old fat, and it fell apart and reformed in dangling gelatinous strands. It saw me a moment after I saw it. Most of me wanted to stand around and shriek, but the part of me that survived far too many battles spun me around and sent me running deeper into the mine. Down, I thought miserably even as I ran. But I couldn't possibly get past it. It filled the central shaft of the mine to capacity. My only hope was to lose it in the tunnels on the third level. I scrambled into the open tunnel mouth and realized almost immediately that I would not be losing the rest of the Sentry anywhere. It was faster than I was, and already practically at my heels. A smear of flesh whipped out and struck me across the back, sending me stumbling. I suspect that the only reason I survived was because it took longer to turn corners than I did. The white beam of my headlamp skidded over a familiar three-way junction. Right was a dead end. Left took me back towards the others. But if they were down in the cave with the wholeness, and even if I survived long enough to reach the spiral crawl space, Sentry would pour down it and devour me first, then the others. The middle tunnel was low and tight, and the word fire damp was something less than something less than a plan slid through my brain together. I dove into the middle tunnel, made it perhaps 10 yards in before something whipped across my ankles and I fell. I hit the ground and thrashed, kicking the coil of flesh from around. Oh God, kicking at the coil of flesh trying to encircle my shins. I managed to get one foot loose and roll over, gasping in not air. Everything slowed down. Crawled backwards onto my elbows. At least I thought I was crawling backwards onto my elbows. And watched as a ball of pale flesh lurched through the tunnel and landed on my foot. The other side of it was black with dust. A fragment of bone emerged from the ball and dabbed down into my calf from a very long distance away. I screamed. In your pocket. Get your hand in your pocket. That's all you need to do. I told my hand to go into my pocket, but I had no idea if it was happening. Controlling a whole arm seemed an impossible feat. Ingold had said that Fragment had to control each muscle individually, and I had never really appreciated how hard that must be. I would have to tell him next time I saw him. You're not going to see him again. You're going to die here, but get your hand into your pocket first. The shapeless lump of flesh stabbed another bone fragment into my leg just above the knee. I realized it was climbing me like a mountaineer, climbing a peak, using the bones like titans to brace itself against. Excuse me. I was probably still screaming, but it all seemed very far away. I felt cold metal under my fingers. That seemed very odd.
Grip it tight. The voice in my head sounded like a little Angus. I wish that Angus was here. No, wait, I didn't wish that. If Angus was here, the monster would be eating him too. The squeeze began to fill as the bulk of Sentry's horrible second body reached the tunnel and began pushing itself inside. Translucent shapes like sea anemones flowered around the opening, then grew darker and more opaque as more of Sentry rushed to fill them. I hitched my body backward, despite the excruciating pain in my leg. Surely it was excruciating. I didn't like to think I'd be screaming so much otherwise. The headlamp beam no longer showed stone overhead, only writhing flesh and protruding bone. It loomed over me like a great wave and hung there for an impossible moment. I clutched the metal thing in my hand and thought rectangle and cold, and I don't mind dying, not really, but did death have to look so revolting? The wave came crashing down. Everything went dark. Something clammy pushed up against my lips and its nostrils. It really was a good thing that I was only partially tethered to reality anymore. Otherwise, I'd find this very disturbing. Now put out your hand, said the voice that wasn't Angus. I tried, but there was something in the way. The voice wasn't impressed. Push then. Don't let go of what you're holding. So I pushed. Muscle parted in front of my fingers. My right hand went through that monster as if it were made of dough. Occasionally, it would hit something thicker, stalks of tendon or bone. Keep pushing. Starting to sound like my first drill sergeant now. I wished it would make up its mind. Something was going up my nose. Maybe when it got to my brain, it could tell the voice to pick an identity and commit. My fingers hit air, then stone. Now, said the voice, and this time it was my father. Alex, do it now. Do what? But the advantage I had over Sentry was that my muscles only had to be muscles, and they remembered things. And what they remembered was a great many hours spent practicing as a teenager, so that when you have a metal lighter in your hand, push your thumb like this, flip your wrist just so. Click. There was a sound so loud I couldn't hear it, and I found myself lifted an inch or two in the air. My last thought before I lost consciousness was that if there were any girls around, they'd be really, really impressed. And that was chapter 14. I knew it wasn't over. I knew it wasn't over. I fucking knew it wasn't over. That's in my bones. I knew it. I knew it. All right. So quick water break, and then we're gonna finish off. This is the last chapter. For real, Sam. Yeah, that feeling was in your gut, wasn't it? If there were any girls around, they'd be really, really impressed. Alex is so fucking funny, dude. All three books, they've made me fucking laugh. I'm a big fan. Makes me want to pick up T. Kingfisher's fantasy series, because if this is the way he writes women in these books, supposedly women, in these books, I'm all for it. I'm all for it. I'm all for a fantasy writer writing women to be strong and fucking funny. That's my jam. All right. Chapter 15, the last chapter. Down any second, someone said, very quietly. I don't care, Denton snapped. It was only a little louder, but he sounded angry. The rest of you get out and let me work then. I couldn't make out what he said in reply. Could I open my eyes? I experimented. They would only go up about halfway, but I could make out the blurry shape of Denton crouched over my legs. Legs? Yes, I had those, didn't I? Did I move them? I tried. My mistake became obvious when pain struck me like a bright light and everything went gray and floaty for a bit. Be ridiculous. I'm telling you, if we move them, there's a chance that bone will hit an artery, and either they bleed out or I slap on a tourniquet and they'll probably lose a leg. I wondered who they were talking about. Me, obviously. I was dead. Though I admit, I hadn't expected to be dead so hurt. I didn't expect being dead to hurt so much. Clearly the priest had been lying to me. What do you mean? I I cracked my eyes open again and saw Denton. He was looking very intently at something. No, someone. Oh, hello, Fragment. You're here too. I hope this didn't mean that they were both dead. That would be sad. Fragment was writing something on his slate. I squinted but couldn't read it. Just has to stay in place until we get Easton up top. Oh, wait, they're talking about me? Somebody else said something, but it sounded like a gnat's buzz in my ears. Denton didn't look away from Fragment. You're sure? It's already plugging the artery and you accidentally dislodge it. Fragment held up the slate. I really wished I could see what was on it. This was starting to sound important. Buzz, 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 went the gnat. It's blood. Couldn't people learn to speak up? Denton's expression was something I had never seen before. Hope and horror in equal mixture. Do it, he said. Start with the lower one. Nothing seemed to happen for a while. Then my calf began to itch like the devil. The itch was interestingly distinct from the pain. I didn't like it at all. I tried to reach down and scratch, and Denton snarled, "Hold him down, you bastards." "No, not like that. You want to puncture along?" Something pressed hard against my shoulder. I managed to turn my head a little, and even through the glare of the headlamp I'd recognize Angus anywhere. "Hold on, youngster," he said. At least I think that's what he said. I could barely hear it, so I had to read his lips while not being able to quite focus my eyes. It might have been, "Hold on, chicken coop." The words are similar in Galatian. That seemed like an odd thing to call me. My leg still itched. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph," Denton said. "Yes. Do the other one." The itching suddenly got about 1,000 times worse. I tried to scratch again, but then there were more hands holding me down and Denton barking orders, and everything was terrible. If I could just scratch, I could deal with it, but no one had warned me that being dead would itch. I tried to tell Angus about the itching, but he just patted my shoulder and didn't seem to hear. "Now," said Denton, "as smooth as you can." The hand holding me shifted, and they were lifting me up toward the ceiling of the mine, and then through the ceiling and into the stone and the darkness. "You," Angus said, "are proof that God looks out for fools and drunkards." "I resent that," I said. Actually, I nearly yelled it. Then I had to consciously lower my voice. My hearing had mostly come back, but not all the way. Denton wasn't sure if I'd ever get the rest back. "I am not a drunkard." Angus snorted explosively and helped me to my feet. I picked up my cane and began limping toward the back of the cavern where Fragment was waiting. It was Fragment who saved me when the fire damp ignited. I would have suffocated long before they were able to drag me out, but the creature had made itself into a kind of tube and burrowed through the remains of the sentry until he could reach me and plaster himself over my nose and mouth. He fed air through until we were able to clear the fallen rubble and pull me free. Angus wasn't wrong. I'd had God's own luck. Sentry's body had shielded me from the worst of the fire damp explosion and the falling rock. My injuries from fighting a monster and blowing up part of a mine amounted to a cracked rib, two admittedly nasty gouges in my left leg, and some burns on the right side of my hand, and the possibly permanent hearing loss, which would at least pair nicely with my tinnitus. Of all of it, the burns were the worst. Burns hurt like nothing else. Denton had done his best and was changing the dressings every day, but my little finger was already hardening into a crooked claw. Oh well, at least it's not my trigger finger. Not like my handwriting would get much worse. Sentry was truly dead. What hadn't died in the blast was doused with lamp oil and set ablaze. Served him right for pretending to be a dog. Angus, Fragment, and Ingold had swept the second floor of the mine while I was recovering. They'd found another, smaller pocket of Sentry, and this time Fragment had overwhelmed it and taken its memories by force. I had the impression that doing so was upsetting, but he had no body language to read. Maybe I only hoped he found it upsetting. Trying to become a new wholeness was Fragment's analysis of Sentry. Perhaps even becoming large enough to destroy the wholeness slumbering peacefully below. Something between a city and a god, made up only of himself. There were bones jumbled inside Sentry's various bodies, some of them being used, most of them broken past all recognition. A ring turned up in the second pocket, which Denton identified as Oscar's. Denton and Fragment had made their own piece. Angus said that he thought it was in the hours when they frantically hauled away the rubble, trying to reach me, while Fragment had been funneling air to keep me alive. He didn't know what to do about the bleeding, Angus had said, rubbing the stubble on his jaw. Pretty soon, Denton was shouting orders at him like a raw recruit, and it stopped mattering that he was basically just a tube and a pair of hands writing on a slate. Then we actually got to you, but the ceiling was maybe about to come down. Denton didn't want to move you, but Fragment did something. Must have worked because we got you up top without killing you. And then Denton started yelling that we were all useless except Fragment, and for God's sake, just to get out of his light and let him work. Angus had nodded then, clearly satisfied with the results, fuck's sake. It's rare that you can mend relationships with an explosion, but I'll take it. Ingold had to explain to me what Fragment had actually done, which was apparently to insert an incredible thin layer of himself into the wounds, with the bone stuck in them, then slowly thicken the layer until the bone popped out. Then he plugged the holes with his own flesh until Denton could operate. The thought made me a little queasy, but not nearly as queasy as seeing just how close one of those holes was to the big artery in my leg. No wonder Denton had been yelling. I reached the edge of the shaft where Fragment stood waiting, with Ingold and, perhaps surprisingly, Roger beside him. It's good to see that you are recovering, Alex Easton. It's good to be recovering. I glanced down into the darkness. I suppose this is goodbye then. We broke through the shell this morning, Ingold confirmed. Part of me went back at once, Fragment wrote. But I wanted to leave enough to say goodbye. He paused, tapping the chalk absently against the slate. And to thank you. You thanked me? I snorted. You saved my life. Twice. And you saved this Fragment's life. Twice. Well, then that probably makes us even. Fragment's eyes were hidden behind the goggles, and perhaps even then, they would not have conveyed any information. The eyes are the window to the soul, they say. Did Fragment have a soul? I thought that he probably did, and it was as much as I could say for any person I knew. There is no debt in a wholeness, he wrote finally. I would offer wholeness to you, if such were possible, but I do not think you would wish such a gift. Afraid not, I said, repressing my shudder at the thought. Though I couldn't help but glance at Ingold and wonder if he would pass up such an opportunity. I took a step back and nodded to Roger. You'll be okay here? Both of you? Roger had elected to stay and guard the mine, in memory of Mr. Oscar. So he said anyway. I suspected that he was actually staying in memory of Thunder. Despite our best explanations, I don't think he truly believed that his dog had ever really existed in the first place. Regardless, Denton had offered to pay him a wage to watch over Hollow Elk and see that it remained undisturbed. After we left, he would board up the entryway more firmly, with the help of the new sentries, which contained fragment within themselves, no doubt, as well as the rest of the wholeness. Fragment had been very clear that there must always be two in the future, to watch over each other as well as the mine. I hope we will be very well, Alex Easton. I'll send books, Ingold promised. You'll never be bored. Roger muttered something under his breath. If I could have walked down into that mine without a cane, I still didn't know if I would have gone to see Fragment rejoin the wholeness. Felt a little like death to me. Poor singular creature that I am. The choice had been taken out of my hands, so Angus and I watched the trio's lights dance as they made their way down to the shaft. We stood for a moment in silence and listened to this. Oh, God, so sorry. Excuse me, I'm so sorry. We stood for a moment in silence and listened to the sounds of the mine breathing out. A slow, peaceful sound like a dreamer deeply asleep. Then I began the slow, long shuffle back to the entryway. Denton was waiting for me there, shadowed by the faithful Kent. Have they gone down? He asked. I lowered myself onto a camp stool. Kent handed me a cup of coffee. They have, I said. Well, that's good then. Denton, too, had made his peace with what slept beneath the mine. And will you be able to go home, you think? I asked. We had tickets for the train tomorrow morning, but as I knew well, there were ways that you can and can't go home. Denton nodded slowly. I still don't like thinking that there are things like Sentry out there, he said, but Fragment's potentially a better surgeon than I'll ever be. He shook his head. I'll get over the one, but probably not the other. Every time I see a patient that could be saved if I could do what he did. He shook his head again, a wry twist to his lips. Pretty sure that'll haunt me to the grave. You could try to convince some of him to come with you, I said. Maybe he'd like to be a doctor. Explain that to the nurses. No, thank you. 3 can keep a secret if 2 of them are dead, and we're at least 3 over. Hell, I'm not that sure about Roger. I'm just hoping if he talks, everyone will assume he's drunk again. Can always come back and check on things, I offered. I expect to be doing so regularly. Fortunately, Elijah over at the camp has offered to contact me if it looks like Roger is, taking his duties less than seriously. And of course, the new sentries will know how to send telegrams as well. He leaned back. I admit, I didn't expect to be tasked with taking care of something like this for the rest of my life, but I suppose someone had to do it. Who better? Asked Ingold, appearing out of the darkness. He dropped down next to the fire and accepted the coffee from Kent. Denton put an arm around him and he leaned into it with no trace of self-consciousness. I certainly wouldn't suggest the American government handle it. But their record with things that aren't, part of their wholeness isn't good. Denton agreed. Christ's blood, I muttered, trying to picture it and failing utterly. They'd probably try to send the poor bastards to Guam. Did everything go... Angus made a grasping gesture with one hand that was probably meant to convey a creature rejoining its long-lost group mind. This was not a concept that lent itself to hand gestures. Nevertheless, Ingold nodded. I think so. At least there were no explosions. Everyone looked at me. I rolled my eyes. You blow up one mine shaft. You're welcome to stay with us in Boston for as long as you like, Denton said. Do some sightseeing? See more of America. Whatever you like. I mean this in the nicest way possible, I said, but I think I have seen enough of America to last me for a while. The parts outside of mine shafts are generally much nicer. So you say. I looked over at Angus. What do you think? He shrugged. Seems a shame to come all this way and not at least look around. I sighed deeply. Fine, but we can stay in America for a week or 2. But I'm not going in any more mines. Sure, said Denton. I don't even want to go into a cellar. That's fine. And if anything weird happens, I'm getting on the boat. Ingold grinned at me. Come now, Alex, what are the odds of something else this strange happening in the next week? But that, as they say, is another story. The end. What a fucking roller coaster in those last few chapters. What a roller coaster in those last few chapters. All the anxiety and the claustrophobia that I have felt throughout this book dissipated after he turned out to be that silly little guy. That is the end of our adventures with Alex Easton. That was book 3 of the Sworn Soldier series. That's the final book. This part's going to be uploaded to YouTube pretty quickly if anybody wants to go back and listen to the full thing. But man, what a ride. What a ride. I enjoyed Easton throughout this entire series. What a wonderful character, wonderfully written, fantastic freaking, I mean, just generally what a great read for all 3 books. Book 2 will be uploaded soon. Book 3 is going to be uploaded tonight. We're going to miss Easton. We're going to miss Easton. But we know that they're out there fucking French women and just living it up for the rest of their days, hopefully. And Angus is, oh, I miss Angus. You know who I missed in this one? Our local mushroom expert. I don't know how much good she would have done in the mine, but I think it would have been to have her in there. But I now have hardcover copies of all 3 of these books. They're going on the bookshelf for presentation and gifts. How wonderful this is. Thank you all for taking that ride with me through all 3 books with our Alex Easton. Mrs. Potter, yep, Mrs. Potter. She would have added just her character. I just love her character. I just love her character in this. Thank you guys again for riding with me through all 3 books now. That's all 3 books we've read on stream. That's our first trilogy done. All 3 books will be uploaded to my YouTube. Please go check it out. NoReignn Reads on YouTube. Reign is 2 N's. Reign is 2 N's. God, I'm feeling that FOMO of the FOMO from like finishing a book and knowing that you're not going to read about the character again. Be a bit sad tonight. I'm gonna go hang out with some friends. But thank you. I love you. Have a wonderful night.